The complete story of Saulė and Mėnuo, the sun and the moon in Baltic mythology. The last pagans of Europe. In the furthest reaches of northeastern Europe, where ancient forests stretch toward cold northern seas and the land remembers the grinding passage of glaciers, there existed peoples who held fast to their old gods longer than any other civilization on the European continent. The Baltic peoples, living in what we now know as Lithuania and Latvia, remained devoted to their ancestral deities well into the late Middle Ages, becoming the final stronghold of paganism in Christian Europe. While the rest of the continent had long since converted to Christianity, these resilient communities continued to honor the gods of their ancestors, maintaining traditions that reached back to the dawn of Indo-European civilization. The story we will explore today comes from this remarkable cultural preservation. Among the Baltic peoples, no myth held more significance than the tale of Saulė and Mėnuo, the sun and the moon. This celestial drama, filled with love, betrayal, divine punishment, and eternal consequences, explains not only the movement of the heavens but also the very nature of cosmic justice and the proper order of the universe. Unlike many mythologies where such stories have been lost to time or heavily distorted through centuries of change, the Baltic tradition maintained this narrative with remarkable consistency, passed down through generations in the haunting melodies of folk songs called dainas, preserved in ritual celebrations that marked the turning of the seasons, and embedded in the daily customs of agricultural life. What makes Baltic mythology particularly fascinating to scholars and enthusiasts of ancient belief systems is its archaic nature. The Baltic languages, Lithuanian and Latvian, are considered among the most conservative Indo-European languages, changing less over millennia than almost any other linguistic family. Just as these languages retained ancient features long after other languages evolved away from their roots, so too did Baltic mythology preserve elements of primordial Indo-European religion that had been transformed or lost elsewhere. When we study the story of Saulė and Mėnuo, we are glimpsing beliefs and narrative structures that may stretch back thousands of years, connecting us to the spiritual worldview of peoples who lived when the great Indo-European migrations were still reshaping the cultural landscape of Europe and Asia. The preservation of these myths owes much to the particular historical circumstances of the Baltic region. Geographic isolation, fierce independence, and successful resistance to foreign conquest allowed the Lithuanians and Latvians to maintain their traditional ways far longer than their neighbors. While the Northern Crusades brought Christianity to most of the Baltic Rim by the 13th century, Lithuania proper did not officially convert until the year 1387. When Grand Duke Jogaila accepted baptism as part of his marriage to Queen Jadwiga of Poland. Even then, Christianization proceeded slowly, meeting resistance from a population deeply attached to their ancestral gods. The region of Samajiša in western Lithuania did not begin its formal conversion until 1413, and in remote rural areas, pagan practices continued in secret for centuries thereafter. This resistance to Christianity was not mere stubbornness or ignorance. For the Baltic peoples, their mythology represented far more than quaint stories about supernatural beings. These were living truths that explained the functioning of the natural world, provided the framework for agricultural success upon which survival depended, and offered a comprehensive cosmology that gave meaning to human existence. The gods were not distant abstractions but active participants in daily life. Saulė, the sun goddess, was not simply the personification of the solar disk but the very source of life itself, the nurturer of crops, the destroyer of darkness and evil spirits, the compassionate mother who showed special favor to orphans and the unfortunate. Mėnuo, the moon god, governed the cycles that dictated when to plant and harvest, when to begin important undertakings, when to seek divine favor through prayer and offering. The story of their marriage, Mėnuo's betrayal, and the resulting cosmic punishment was not simply entertainment but a fundamental explanation for observable phenomena that governed every aspect of existence. Why does the moon change its shape throughout the month, waxing and waning in eternal cycle? Why do the sun and moon never share the sky except in those rare moments of eclipse? Why does one illuminate the day while the other rules the night? The myth provides answers to these questions while simultaneously exploring profound themes about the nature of law, the consequences of transgression, the proper ordering of relationships, and the establishment of cosmic justice. Before we can fully appreciate this magnificent tale, we must first understand the world in which it takes place. We must acquaint ourselves with the pantheon of Baltic deities, explore the cosmology that structures their universe, and come to know the major divine actors whose choices and conflicts drive this celestial drama. We must understand that for the ancient Balts, the heavens were not empty space dotted with distant lights but a populated realm where gods dwelled, where divine events occurred, and where the fate of the world below was determined. The sky was not merely above. It was home to a divine family whose relationships and conflicts were as complex and emotionally resonant as any human family's struggles. The world before the heavenly wedding. In the beginning, according to the ancient Baltic peoples, there was the act of creation itself, though the exact nature of that creation varied somewhat between different communities and regions. Some traditions held that heaven was created first, followed by the earth emerging from primordial waters. Others taught that earth and water existed together in an undifferentiated state before being separated, with the terrain of the world then being carved and shaped into its present form. The common thread running through these creation accounts is a sense of sequential development, of the world coming into being through stages rather than all at once, and of the involvement of divine creative forces in bringing order out of chaos. When the world was new and darkness covered everything, there arose a need for light. In those primordial days, there existed a divine blacksmith whose name was Teleovelis, though he was sometimes called by other names including Calvis, Calvelis, and Calvatus. The etymology of his name has been debated by scholars, with some suggesting it derives from words meaning God of the road, while others argue it means God of the earth, connecting it to the Latin word tellus. Still others see in the name a connection to the Baltic word for smith, calvis, suggesting his identity was primarily defined by his craft. Regardless of the precise origins of his name, his function was clear and crucial. He was the divine craftsman whose skill at the forge shaped the fundamental elements of existence. According to the ancient chronicles, including the Slavic translation of the Chronicle of John Malalas from the year 1261, Teleovelis was the one who forged the sun itself. Working at his celestial forge with tools that could shape the very essence of light and heat, this divine blacksmith crafted the great glowing orb that would become the center of life for the world below. The act of creation was not enough, however. Having forged this magnificent creation, Teleovelis then took it in his powerful arms and threw it up into the sky, where it took its place in the heavens and began its eternal journey across the celestial vault. This dramatic act of hurling the sun into the heavens captures something essential about Baltic religious sensibility. The universe required active divine intervention, forceful action, and skilled craft to function properly. The blacksmith god's association with Saul did not end with her creation. In later traditions, it was said that Teleovelis continued to forge the sun anew each morning, an endless labor that ensured the return of light after each night's darkness. He was also credited with creating special rings, perhaps symbolic of cosmic order or celestial marriage, that would allow the goddess Osrine to wed the sun. The smith's role as both creator and maintainer of solar light made him essential to the cosmic order, though in the hierarchy of Baltic deities, he generally ranked below the greatest gods. His connection to the earth and the forge, to the transformative power of fire and the secrets of metallurgy, linked him to both creative and potentially chthonic forces. The sun that Teleovelis created was not simply an inanimate celestial body but a living goddess, radiant and powerful. Her name, Saul, derives from the Proto-Baltic word for sun, and in both Lithuanian and Latvian languages, the sun retains its grammatically feminine gender, reflecting the ancient understanding of the sun as a female deity. This distinguishes Baltic tradition from many other Indo-European mythologies where the sun is typically male, such as the Greek Helios, the Vedic Surya, or the Roman Sol. The Baltic feminine sun, however, has deep roots in Indo-European tradition and reflects patterns found in some of the most archaic layers of myth. Saul was understood to be one of the most powerful deities in the entire Baltic pantheon. As the source of all light and warmth, she was directly responsible for life itself. Without her daily journey across the sky, crops would not grow, animals would not thrive, and humans would perish in cold darkness. But her importance transcended even these practical considerations. Saul was the very embodiment of virtue, goodness, and beneficent power. Virtuous women were compared to her as the highest compliment possible. In her radiant presence, the forces of evil and darkness scattered and fled. Demons, malevolent spirits, and creatures of shadow could not endure her light and retreated before her brilliance. allowing humans to go about their daily tasks in safety and security. The goddess had particular patrons among humanity. She was especially devoted to orphans and those whom fortune had treated harshly, earning her the title of patroness of the unfortunate. This compassionate aspect of her nature made her beloved among the common people, who saw in her not merely a distant cosmic force but a caring divine mother who understood their struggles and sufferings. Shepherds held her in particularly high esteem, composing numerous songs and prayers in her honor, asking her protection for their flocks and guidance in their labors. Women, especially those without husbands or support, turned to her in times of need, knowing she would not abandon those whom society might forget. Yet Saul also existed in complex relationship with the highest powers of the Baltic divine realm. At the supreme level of the pantheon stood Daivas, whose name literally means God, and derives from the same Proto-Indo-European root that gives us the Latin deus, the Greek Zeus, and the Sanskrit Dyaush. Daivas was the primordial supreme god, the sky father, the source of divine law and cosmic order. He was sometimes described as the creator of the cultural values of humanity, the legislator who established law and order in the world. Unlike the actively involved gods of many mythologies, Daivas appears to have been what scholars call a deus otiosus, a god who, after establishing the world and its laws, largely withdrew from direct intervention, leaving the governance of daily affairs to more active deities. Daivas dwelt upon a high mountain, often described as silver or crowned with silver, where he maintained a celestial farmstead complete with fields, gardens, houses, and even a traditional Baltic sauna or purtis. This heavenly farm was a rich and productive estate, reflecting the ideal of prosperity that Baltic peoples aspired to in their earthly lives. The god traveled in a golden or silver chariot or sleigh, pulled by two dappled horses called Dievo Zergai. Sometimes these horses appeared in other forms, manifesting as black dogs or black ravens, demonstrating the shape-shifting nature of divine forces. When Daivas chose to interact with humans, he often disguised himself, appearing as an old man or beggar to test the goodness and generosity of mortals. Those who showed kindness to this disguised deity, offering hospitality to what seemed to be a poor traveler, would be rewarded with gifts and blessings. Those who turned him away or treated him poorly would discover they had failed a divine test. This motif of the disguised god wandering among humans to evaluate their character appears in many mythologies but held particular importance in Baltic tradition, where hospitality and generosity were highly valued social virtues. Daivas had complex relationships with the other great deities. He was closely connected to Saul, the sun goddess, though the exact nature of their relationship varied in different traditions. Sometimes he appeared as her husband, sometimes as her brother, sometimes as her close servant or companion. What remained constant was their shared association with the celestial realm, with divine order, and with the beneficent forces that sustained life and civilization. Both were celebrated during the great summer solstice festival called Rassos, when the sun reached the peak of its annual journey and the power of light triumphed over darkness for the longest day of the year. The god was also understood to have sons, divine twins known as Dievos Senilii in Lithuanian or Dieva Deli in Latvian, meaning sons of God. These divine twins had clear parallels in other Indo-European mythologies, the Vedic Asvins, the Greek Dioscuri, and various other paired divine brothers who served important functions in their respective pantheons. In Baltic tradition, these twins were associated with horses and celestial phenomena, serving as helpers and intermediaries between the highest divine powers and the needs of humanity. Yet for all his importance as the supreme deity, Daivas was often overshadowed in practice by another god, one whose presence was far more actively felt in daily life and whose powers were regularly invoked by common people. This was Perkunas, the thunder god, called Perkins in Latvian, whose name derives from an ancient Indo-European root related to striking and thunder. Perkunas was in many ways the most important god in practical Baltic religion, the deity most commonly invoked in prayers and offerings, the divine force whose intervention people most actively sought. Where Daivas was distant and withdrawn, a non-active divine being whose direct involvement in worldly affairs was minimal, Perkunas was dramatically present and engaged. He was the god of thunder, lightning, storms, rain, fire, war, law, order, fertility, mountains, and oak trees. His domain encompassed both the creative and destructive aspects of natural power. As a fertility god, his spring lightning purified the earth and stimulated plant growth. His rain was essential for crops, and farmers would pray to him during droughts, making offerings of black animals, a black calf, black goat, and black cock, while gathered in sacred oak groves on hilltops, pouring beer into fires as libation while calling upon him to send the life-giving rain. But Perkunas was also a god of justice and punishment, a divine enforcer who struck down evildoers with his thunderbolts and maintained cosmic order through his vigilant oversight. He had the power and authority to discipline not only humans but also the gods themselves when they transgressed divine law. This combination of fertility god and justice enforcer made him essential to Baltic cosmology. He was the active principle that maintained the proper functioning of both nature and society, ensuring that laws were upheld, transgressions punished, and the rhythm of the seasons continued as it should. Perkunas was typically depicted as a middle-aged, vigorous man with a copper or black beard and a ruddy, powerful face. He was armed with an axe and arrows, the weapons with which he struck at demons and wrongdoers. He rode across the sky in a two-wheeled chariot, though accounts varied on whether it was pulled by goats, as in the mythology of the similar Norse god Thor, or by swift horses. Some traditions described him riding a single fiery horse or driving a chariot of iron and fire that rumbled across the heavens, creating the sound of thunder. The stones in the sky, which rumbled during storms, were understood to be part of his celestial dwelling, connecting him to ancient Indo-European mythological motifs about thunder gods who resided in mountain or sky palaces filled with boulders that rolled and crashed during storms. The oak tree was sacred to Perkunas above all other plants. As the tree most often struck by lightning, it became his symbol and dwelling place. Sacred oak groves served as temples where worship of the thunder god was conducted. The oak of Perkunas was mentioned in historical sources from the early 19th century, and individual sacred oaks were known throughout the Baltic region, some of them maintained as holy sites for centuries. Under these trees, eternal flames were kept burning in the god's honor, tended by priests and priestesses who ensured the sacred fire never went out. The connection between Perkunas, oak trees, lightning, and fire created a powerful complex of symbols that reinforced his position as the active guardian of cosmic and social order. His relationship with other deities was complex. In some traditions he was described as the son of Daivas, making him a second-generation god who enacted the will of the supreme Sky Father. In other accounts he appeared more independent, acting on his own authority to maintain justice and order. His wife, according to most traditions, was Zemina, the Earth Goddess, forming the classic Indo-European pairing of Sky Father and Earth Mother, thunder and earth, rain and fertile ground. Their sacred marriage was celebrated each spring when the first thunder of the season announced that Perkunas had awakened from his winter dormancy and was once again engaging with the earth, fertilizing it with his lightning and rain so that crops could grow and life could flourish. But Perkunas had another important relationship, one that would prove central to our story. He served as the guardian of the heavenly order, the enforcer who ensured that even the gods themselves did not transgress divine law. When cosmic transgressions occurred, when the proper order of the heavens was violated, it fell to Perkunas to deliver punishment and restore balance. His thunderbolts were the instruments of divine justice, his wrath the consequence of wrongdoing that could not be tolerated. This made him both feared and respected, both honored for his life-giving reign and dreaded for his terrible punishment of those who violated the sacred laws of the cosmos. Into this divine realm, populated by Daivas the Sky Father, Perkunas the Thunder God, and the radiant Saul, there appeared another celestial deity of great importance. Mėnuo, the moon god, was known by several names and epithets. His primary name derived from the ancient Baltic word for moon, connecting him to the Proto-Indo-European lunar traditions. The new or young moon was sometimes called Dievitas, meaning little god or prince, suggesting his status as a son or lesser aspect of the supreme deity. This title carried special significance, as the new moon was considered particularly receptive to human prayers and was especially honored by farmers whose agricultural activities were timed according to lunar phases. Mėnuo appeared as a god dressed in a starry gown, reflecting his nature as a celestial being associated with the night sky and the stars. He traveled through the heavens in his own chariot, described as being drawn by gray horses, in contrast to Saulė's bright white or golden steeds. His monthly renewal of strength as the moon waxed from new to full was understood to be imparted to all growing things below, making him essential to the agricultural cycle. Farmers and rural communities paid careful attention to his phases, timing their planting, cultivation, and harvesting according to his rhythm. Yet despite his importance to agriculture and his dignified status as a celestial deity, there was something about Mėnuo that suggested instability, changeability, a nature that shifted and transformed. Just as the moon itself never maintains a constant appearance, waxing and waning in eternal cycle, never showing more than one face to the earth below, so too did the moon god display traits of inconstancy. This aspect of his character would prove crucial to the drama that was about to unfold. The stage was now set for the greatest drama of Baltic mythology. The divine actors were in place. Daivas, the supreme sky father, Perkunas, the thunder god and enforcer of justice, Saul, the radiant sun goddess, and Mėnuo, the changeable moon god. The cosmos was ordered and functioning, the earth below flourished under the beneficent rule of the heavenly powers, and the daily rising and setting of the sun and the monthly cycles of the moon provided the rhythm and structure for all of existence. But this harmony was not destined to last. A marriage was about to take place, a union that would join sun and moon in sacred bond. Yet this wedding would not lead to eternal bliss but would instead become the prelude to cosmic catastrophe, divine betrayal, and punishment that would echo through the heavens for all time, changing forever the relationship between the sun and moon and establishing the celestial order we still observe today. Saul, the radiant sun goddess. Before we can fully understand the tragedy that befell the heavenly marriage, we must come to know more intimately the goddess at the center of this drama. Saul was far more than simply the sun that rose each morning and set each evening. She was a fully realized divine personality, a goddess of tremendous power and profound character whose attributes and nature were detailed in countless folk songs, prayers, rituals, and stories that survived among the Baltic peoples long after official conversion to Christianity. The appearance of Saul was described in vivid detail in the folk traditions. She manifested as a figure of extraordinary beauty, radiant in the most literal sense. Her hair was golden, gleaming like the precious metal and flowing in waves that caught and reflected light. This golden hair was not merely decorative but symbolic of her solar nature, each strand seemingly imbued with the essence of sunlight itself. Upon her head she wore a golden crown, a symbol of her divine sovereignty and her role as one of the greatest deities in the pantheon. This crown was sometimes described as sparkling, set with gems that caught and refracted her innate brilliance into dancing points of light. Her clothing matched her celestial splendor. Saul dressed in garments of gold, though descriptions varied on the exact nature of these garments. Some traditions described her as wearing robes of golden silk that seemed to shimmer and flow like liquid light. Others spoke of clothes woven with threads of multiple precious colors, red representing the fiery aspect of the sun, gold for her divine nature, silver for her connection to other celestial beings, and white for purity and virtue. Her outfit included specific items mentioned in folk songs: golden slippers or gilded shoes in which she danced upon silver hills, a golden scarf, a golden belt that cinched her radiant garments, and other golden accessories including rings, ribbons, and tassels that adorned her divine person. The consistent theme across these descriptions is light, precious metals, and the warm glow of gold. Everything about Saul's appearance emphasized her nature as the source of illumination, warmth, and life-giving radiance. She was not simply clothed in gold but seemed to be made of light itself, a being whose very substance was luminosity. Folk riddles and songs sometimes described her as a golden wheel or a golden circle, referring to her solar disk appearance when viewed from Earth. At sunrise and sunset, when the sun appeared red in the sky, she was associated with red imagery: a red apple falling from the tree of heaven, a rose in full bloom, a crown or ring colored crimson by the atmospheric effects of dawn and dusk. The goddess did not traverse the heavens on foot but rode in a magnificent chariot, though descriptions of this celestial vehicle varied across different traditions and regions. The most common account described a carriage with copper wheels, gleaming and bright, never tarnishing or losing their luster despite the endless journey across the sky. Another tradition spoke of a golden chariot, brilliant and precious, worthy of the goddess who rode within it. Some accounts mentioned a pretty little sleigh made of fish bones, an unusual detail that may connect to ancient Baltic beliefs about the relationship between celestial and aquatic realms, or perhaps representing the transformation of her vehicle during her nocturnal journey. This chariot or sleigh was pulled by horses, and these steeds were among Saul's most important attributes. The horses never tired, never needed to rest, never broke their steady pace across the heavens. They neither sweated nor showed strain despite pulling the sun from horizon to horizon day after day, year after year, for all eternity. The color of these horses was a matter of some variation in the folk tradition. Most commonly they were described as white, reflecting purity and celestial nature. But some accounts spoke of 3 horses rather than 2, colored golden, silver, and diamond, representing perhaps different aspects of solar light: the warm yellow of midday, the cooler silver of morning, and the brilliant clear quality of intense sunlight. Latvian folk songs, called dainas, provided additional details. In these traditions, Saulė's horses were described as yellow or having golden or fiery coloring, their coats seeming to glow with their own inner light. Their hooves and bridles were said to be golden, and they themselves were sometimes described as golden beings, their entire bodies reflecting the hues of the bright or twilight sky. Lithuanian riddles captured the essence of this horse imagery, describing the sun as a ball with 100 horses, using the phrase Simtas Arklių Nepaves, which was paralleled in Latvian songs as Sims Kumelinu. This multiplicity of horses might have referred to the sun's rays, each beam of light imagined as a swift celestial steed carrying the sun's power to earth. The daily journey of Saul followed a pattern described in both practical and mythological terms. Each morning, the goddess would awaken and prepare for her journey across the sky. This preparation was not a solitary task but involved the assistance of Osrine, the morning star, who would light the fire for Saul and make her ready for another day's travel. Once prepared, Saul would mount her chariot and begin her course across the heavenly vault, traveling from east to west, bringing light and warmth to everything below. The destination of Saulė's nightly journey was her castle, a magnificent dwelling place located at the end of the sea or sometimes described as beyond the sea on a high mountain or hill. This castle was no ordinary structure but a palace worthy of a great goddess. It stood upon glass or silver hills, gleaming in the distance, a beacon of divine splendor. The castle walls were made of copper, a metal sacred to solar deities across many cultures, and within these walls the goddess maintained her heavenly household. Some traditions placed this castle in the east, where the sun rises, while others located it in the west, where the sun sets, and still others suggested she had multiple residences or that her castle existed in a realm beyond ordinary directional constraints, accessible only to divine beings and positioned at the boundary between the mortal world and the purely celestial sphere. The description of Saulė's castle included wonderful details that revealed how the ancient Balts imagined the lifestyle of their solar deity. The castle had stables for her tireless horses, and within these stables stood golden mangers filled with the finest fodder, though what celestial horses might eat was never entirely clear. Perhaps they fed on starlight or morning dew, or some other substance unknown to mortals. The goddess herself had rooms appointed with fine furnishings, including a bed that was prepared each evening by Vakarine, the evening star, who served as the sun's companion and attendant. This bed was sometimes described as made of silver, with fine linens and soft coverings where the goddess could rest during her nocturnal hours. But Saul did not simply disappear during the night, vanishing from the world until morning. Instead, she underwent a transformation. When her daily journey across the sky was complete and she descended below the western horizon, her chariot would transform into a boat or copper vessel. In this maritime form, the goddess would sail across the underworld sea, traversing the dark waters that lay beneath the earth. This nocturnal voyage was essential to the cosmic cycle, for it allowed Saul to complete her circuit and return to the eastern horizon where she would rise again as morning came. The journey through the underworld was not without purpose. Some traditions held that during these dark hours, Saul would visit the realm of the dead, bringing light and warmth to the souls who dwelled in that shadowy place. She was described as warming the stones for the dead, a reference to the Baltic tradition of heating stones in saunas to produce steam and warmth. Just as the living enjoyed the comfort of heated stones in their bathhouses, so too did the dead receive this comfort from the goddess during her nocturnal passage through their realm. This compassionate aspect of her nature extended even beyond the living world, ensuring that not even death could separate people from the beneficent care of the sun goddess. The relationship between Saul and water was particularly important in Baltic tradition. Despite being a solar fire deity, she was closely associated with aquatic imagery. She washed herself in the sea, or in special bodies of water, purifying herself of the dust and weariness gathered during her daily journey. Folk songs described her bathing in a silver or golden basin, using 9 types of soap, attended by her daughters who helped with this ritual cleansing. The water in which she bathed or through which she traveled during her nocturnal journey was considered sacred and purifying, imbued with her divine essence. This may explain why water collected during certain solar festivals, particularly the summer solstice, was believed to have healing and magical properties. Saulė's role as a mother goddess was one of her most important aspects. She was not a distant, untouchable deity but a compassionate maternal figure who took active interest in the welfare of her children, both divine and human. To the human population, she was the universal mother, the nurturer who made life possible through her warmth and light. Crops grew because of her beneficence. Animals thrived under her watchful care. Children developed and matured under her blessing. The very possibility of life on Earth depended on her daily appearance and her generous distribution of light and warmth. Her special concern for orphans and the unfortunate was frequently emphasized in folk tradition. Songs and prayers addressed her as the protector of those without parents, the guardian of children left vulnerable by death or abandonment. Widows and the poor could appeal to her for aid, knowing she would not turn away from their suffering. This aspect of her character made her particularly beloved among common people, who saw in her not merely a cosmic force but a divine being who understood hardship and responded to it with compassion. The goddess also served as patroness of specific human occupations and activities. Shepherds held her in especially high regard, for their flocks depended on her warmth and light, and their work required them to be out under the sky during the day, under her direct observation and care. They composed countless songs in her honor, asking her blessing on their animals and their labors. Women, particularly those engaged in traditional textile work such as spinning, weaving, and sewing, also claimed her as their patron. The connection between solar light and textile work was natural. Such work required good light to see the fine details of thread and fabric, and the sun provided the best illumination for these essential tasks. Saulė's relationship with virtue and morality was another defining characteristic. She was the very embodiment of goodness, righteousness, and proper behavior. A virtuous woman might be compared to the sun, the highest compliment possible in Baltic culture. To be sun-like was to be warm, generous, life-giving, pure, and beneficial to all. The goddess herself was understood to be perfectly virtuous, incapable of wickedness or malevolence. Even when angered, her wrath was justified and her actions aimed at restoring proper order rather than causing harm for its own sake. This association with virtue had practical implications for daily life. People swore oaths by the sun, calling upon Saul to witness their promises and punish them if they broke their word. Lying or false swearing in the presence of the sun was considered especially heinous, for it involved directly deceiving or dishonoring the goddess. Criminal activities were avoided during daylight hours not merely because witnesses could see more clearly but because performing evil acts under the direct gaze of the sun goddess was spiritually dangerous and morally repugnant. The goddess also had dominion over demons and evil spirits. Her light was anathema to beings of darkness and shadow. When the sun rose each morning, malevolent creatures that had roamed during the night would flee to their hiding places, unable to withstand her radiant presence. Diseases, misfortunes, and curses were driven away by her appearance. This protective aspect made sunrise a particularly important time in Baltic folk belief. The moment when the sun first appeared on the horizon was considered especially powerful, a threshold time when prayers were most effective and when the goddess's power to banish evil was at its peak. Folk songs and dainas preserved countless details about Saulė's character and activities. She was described as dancing on silver hills, her golden slippers flashing as she moved with divine grace. She was depicted as active and energetic, never idle or passive despite the repetitive nature of her daily journey. She engaged in domestic activities like weaving and spinning, connecting her to the everyday labors of mortal women. She rode her pretty little horse, galloped across the sky, and drove her chariot with skill and precision. She wore jewelry, golden rings, coral beads, silver ornaments, all befitting her status as a great goddess. The seasonal variations in Saulė's power and behavior were carefully observed. During the summer months, when days were long and the sun's path across the sky was high and extensive, the goddess was understood to be at her peak strength. The summer solstice, when the sun reached its northernmost point and the day was longest, was her greatest festival. At this time, called Rasos in Lithuanian or Jāņi in Latvian, the goddess's power was celebrated with all-night festivities, bonfires, songs, dances, and rituals designed to honor her and ensure her continued beneficence. Conversely, during winter months when days grew short and the sun's path across the sky was low and brief, Saul was understood to be weakened or weary. From late autumn through the winter solstice, there was concern that the sun might grow so weak she would fail to return, plunging the world into eternal darkness and death. Rituals during this time were designed to strengthen the goddess, to encourage her return, and to ensure that the lengthening of days would commence after the winter solstice. When the sun finally began its return, lengthening the days incrementally, this was cause for celebration and relief, for it meant the goddess had renewed her strength and would once again bring warmth and light to the world. Sacred animals were associated with Saul, creatures that enjoyed her special protection and favor. Horses, of course, were paramount given their role in pulling her chariot. White horses were especially sacred, their color reflecting the purity and brilliance of solar light. But another creature held equally important status in the goddess's regard, the grass snake, called Zaltys in Lithuanian. These non-venomous serpents that inhabited the Baltic countryside were considered sacred to the sun goddess and enjoyed protected status. To kill a grass snake was a serious transgression, for these creatures were understood to be under Saul's direct care. Folk belief held that if a grass snake was killed, Saul herself would weep, her tears falling as dew upon the earth, mourning the death of her favored creature. The connection between Saul and grass snakes likely had ancient Indo-European roots, connecting solar deities with serpentine imagery and with the cycle of death and renewal that snakes embodied through their shedding of skin. In practical terms, grass snakes were beneficial creatures that controlled rodent populations and were harmless to humans, so protecting them served agricultural interests. But in mythological terms, their association with the sun goddess elevated them to sacred status, making them intermediaries between the human and divine realms. Other animals sacred to Saul included white birds, particularly white doves or other white-colored avian species. White cows and white goats were also associated with her, their milk considered especially pure and beneficial. Red roosters, whose crowing announced the dawn and the sun's return, were also connected to solar worship. These creatures were sometimes sacrificed to the goddess during important rituals, or they were protected and honored as living symbols of her presence and power. The worship of Saul was not confined to formal temples or priesthoods but was integrated into daily life and the agricultural calendar. Each sunrise might be greeted with a prayer or gesture of respect. During important agricultural activities, the goddess would be invoked for her blessing. When illness struck, prayers would be offered to her, asking for her healing light to drive away sickness. Women in childbirth might call upon her for protection and assistance. Travelers would ask her guidance and safety for their journeys. This integration of solar worship into everyday life meant that Saul was not a distant deity invoked only on special occasions but a constant presence whose favor was sought throughout the rhythms of daily existence. The goddess was also associated with particular plants and natural phenomena. Flowers that followed the sun's movement across the sky, such as sunflowers, were connected to her. The color yellow or gold in plants was sometimes attributed to her influence. Herbs gathered at the summer solstice, when her power peaked, were believed to be especially potent because they had absorbed her concentrated divine essence. The morning dew, which appeared at sunrise, was considered a gift from the goddess, and water collected from this dew on certain sacred days was believed to have healing and beautifying properties. Saul's voice was said to be heard in certain sounds of nature. Some traditions suggested that the morning sounds of birds singing at dawn were actually the voices of the sun's attendants, announcing her arrival. The rustling of leaves in the morning breeze might be understood as the stirring caused by her passage. The warmth felt on one's face when standing in direct sunlight was the literal touch of the goddess, her presence made tangible through sensation. This embodied, experiential relationship with the deity made her real and immediate to her worshippers in a way that abstract theological concepts could never achieve. In artistic representations and folk art, Saul appeared in various symbolic forms. The solar disk itself was her most common representation, often decorated with rays emanating outward. Sometimes she was depicted as a wheel with spokes, connecting solar symbolism with the cycle of the year and the turning of seasons. The swastika, an ancient Indo-European solar symbol representing the sun's movement across the sky and the cycle of seasons, was associated with her in Baltic folk art, appearing on textiles, pottery, and other decorative items. Crosses within circles, rosettes, and other circular or radial designs served as solar symbols in Baltic visual culture, marking items as being under the goddess's protection or dedicated to her honor. The relationship between Saul and human women deserves special attention, for it reveals much about Baltic gender concepts and social organization. The goddess served as a model of ideal womanhood, industrious, compassionate, nurturing, beautiful, virtuous, and powerful within her proper sphere. Women looked to her as a divine exemplar, and mothers taught their daughters to emulate solar virtues. The comparison of a woman to the sun was not merely about physical beauty but encompassed character, behavior, and social role. A sun-like woman was one who brought warmth and light to her household, who nurtured children and supported her family, who worked diligently at her tasks, and who maintained moral righteousness in all her dealings. Yet Saul was not merely a domestic figure despite these associations. She was a sovereign goddess, an independent power who ruled her own realm and commanded cosmic forces. She made her own decisions, followed her own path across the sky, and exercised authority over her domain. This combination of maternal nurturing and sovereign power provided a model of femininity that acknowledged both domestic responsibilities and female agency and authority. Women could be mothers and caretakers while also being powerful figures in their own right, and Saul embodied this dual nature. The prayers and invocations addressed to Saul reveal the intimate, personal relationship her worshippers felt with her. These were not formal, distant theological statements but heartfelt appeals to a goddess understood to care about individual human concerns. "Little son, our mother," some prayers began, using diminutive terms of endearment that expressed both respect and affection. People told her their troubles, asked her help with specific problems, thanked her for her blessings, and sought her intercession in their struggles. The tone of these prayers was conversational, even familiar, reflecting a relationship of trust and mutual regard rather than fearful submission. This, then, was Saul, radiant goddess of the sun, beautiful beyond description, clothed in gold and crowned with light, riding her chariot across the heavens with tireless horses, dwelling in her castle beyond the sea, nurturing all life with her warmth, protecting the unfortunate, driving away darkness and evil, embodying virtue and righteousness, connected to water and earth despite her fiery nature, mother to gods and mortals alike, sovereign over her celestial realm, beloved and honored. Throughout the Baltic lands, she was a fully realized divine personality, complex and multifaceted, powerful yet compassionate, distant yet intimately involved in human life. Understanding her nature and character is essential to grasping the tragedy of what was about to occur, for the violation committed against such a goddess was not merely a personal betrayal but a cosmic transgression that would shake the very foundations of the heavenly order. Mėnuo, the moon god. Where Saul was radiant constancy, her divine counterpart Mėnuo embodied change and transformation. The moon god was a figure of complexity, displaying characteristics that made him both revered and problematic, both essential to cosmic order and somehow unstable within it. To understand the great drama of Baltic mythology, we must come to know this changeable deity as intimately as we have come to know the sun goddess. The very name Mėnuo derives from the ancient Baltic and Proto-Indo-European word for moon, connecting him to a long tradition of lunar deities across related cultures. In Lithuanian, he was called Mėnuo or Mėnulis, with the latter being a diminutive form suggesting affection or familiarity. In Latvian tradition he was known as Mėnulis from the same linguistic root. The new moon had its own special designation, Dievaitis meaning little god or young god, or sometimes Jaunudis meaning young man. This naming pattern suggested a renewal or rebirth that occurred with each lunar cycle, the moon god dying and being reborn in endless succession, forever young, forever renewed, yet never maintaining a single constant form. Unlike Saul, whose appearance was consistently described in terms of brilliance, gold, and radiant beauty, Mėnuo's appearance varied more in folk tradition, perhaps reflecting the changing phases of the moon itself. He was most commonly depicted as a male figure, handsome and well-formed, dressed in distinctive garments. His most notable article of clothing was his starry gown, a robe or mantle that glittered with stars, making him appear as though he wore the night sky itself. This starry garment connected him intimately to the celestial realm, marking him as a being of the heavens who moved among the constellations and was accompanied by them in his journey across the night sky. The color associations with Mėnuo differed from the golden warmth of Saul. Where she was bright yellow and radiant gold, he was silver and gray, reflecting the cooler, paler light of the moon. His chariot was pulled by gray horses rather than white or golden ones, and these steeds were described as having a different temperament from the tireless, steady horses of the sun. The moon's horses were perhaps more mysterious, creatures of the night rather than day, comfortable in shadow and darkness rather than blazing light. Some folk traditions described Mėnuo as having a ruddy face, particularly when the moon appeared reddish during certain atmospheric conditions or during eclipses. This red coloring might be understood as evidence of either health and vigor or, more ominously, as a sign of shame, embarrassment, or the lingering marks of divine punishment. The physical appearance of the moon in the sky, changing from crescent to full and back again, waxing and waning in perpetual cycle, was understood as reflecting the changing state of the god himself, his strength and vitality ebbing and flowing with his visible phases. Mėnuo's dwelling place was less clearly defined than Saul's castle beyond the sea. As a nighttime deity, his realm was the darkness itself, the nighttime sky through which he traveled. Some traditions suggested he had his own heavenly residence, perhaps located in the eastern or northern reaches of the celestial vault, but descriptions of this dwelling were less detailed and less consistent than those of Saul's castle. The moon god seemed more itinerant, more transient in his nature, perhaps lacking the stable home and household that characterized the sun goddess's domain. The role of Mėnuo in Baltic cosmology and daily life was substantial and multifaceted. He governed the night, bringing light to the darkness and making nocturnal activities possible. Without his light, the hours between sunset and sunrise would be periods of complete blackness, dangerous and disorienting. The moon's illumination, while much weaker than the sun's, was sufficient to allow people and animals to see and navigate during nighttime hours. Travelers appreciated his light, shepherds watched their flocks by his glow, and nocturnal predators, both human and animal, hunted beneath his gaze. More importantly, Mėnuo governed the cycles that structured agricultural life. The lunar month provided a natural unit of time measurement, and the phases of the moon were carefully observed and used to determine when various agricultural tasks should be performed. Planting was often timed according to the moon's phases, with the waxing moon considered favorable for crops that grew above ground and the waning moon better for root vegetables. Harvesting, animal breeding, timber cutting, and numerous other activities were all scheduled according to lunar phases. This made the moon god essential to the prosperity and survival of agricultural communities. The new moon, called Diavitis or Janutis, was considered especially significant and powerful. This was the young moon, newly reborn after its period of invisibility, fresh and receptive to human prayers and appeals. Agricultural workers would watch for the first appearance of the crescent moon and would offer prayers and petitions to it, asking for good fortune in their labors. The new moon was understood to be in a state of growth and increasing power, and this growing strength would be imparted to crops, animals, and human endeavors if properly honored. There were specific protocols for greeting the new moon, including genuflection, prayer, and sometimes offerings of food or drink. The full moon held its own significance, representing the peak of lunar power. During the nights of the full moon, when the moon's disk appeared complete and bright, its influence on the world below was understood to be at maximum strength. Certain magical or religious activities were conducted specifically during the full moon to take advantage of this concentrated power. Conversely, the dark of the moon, when the moon was invisible in the sky, was considered a dangerous or inauspicious time, a period when evil forces might have greater freedom to operate without the moon's watchful presence. Mėnuo's relationship with stars was complex and important. In some traditions, the stars were described as his children or his servants, beings that accompanied him in his journey across the night sky. The evening star and morning star, the planet Venus in its two manifestations, were sometimes described as his daughters or as closely associated with him. This connected the moon god to the broader celestial family and gave him a patriarchal role in the nighttime sky, though his authority and stability in this role were questioned by the events of the great myth. The god was associated with certain animals and natural phenomena. Nocturnal creatures, particularly owls and other night-hunting birds, were connected to his realm. Wolves, which howled at the moon, had a special relationship with him. Some folk beliefs held that the moon's phases affected animal behavior, particularly the breeding cycles of livestock, making farmers attentive to lunar timing when managing their herds. The tides of the sea, which even ancient peoples observed rose and fell with the moon's cycles, were attributed to his influence, connecting him to water and maritime activities despite his celestial nature. In folk songs and dainas, Mėnuo appeared in various scenarios and narratives. He was described as traveling, wandering, sometimes seeming restless or seeking something. He rode his gray horses, drove his chariot across the starry sky, and sometimes descended to earth to interact with mortals or other divine beings. These stories portrayed him as active and mobile, never static or fixed, always in motion like the moon itself that moves through its phases and travels across the sky each night. The relationship between Mėnuo and timekeeping deserves special attention. Before the adoption of solar calendars and standardized systems of dating, many cultures used lunar calendars based on the moon's cycles. The Baltic peoples were no exception, and the moon god thus served a crucial function as the measurer of time, the celestial clock by which months and seasons were reckoned. The lunar month of approximately 29.5 days provided a natural unit that structured the flow of time. 12 or 13 lunar months made up a year, and the slight mismatch between lunar and solar years required periodic adjustments, but the basic framework of temporal organization came from observing Mėnuo's regular cycle. This timekeeping function was not merely practical but had profound religious and cosmic significance. Time itself was divine, was governed by a god, was not merely a mathematical abstraction but a living reality overseen by celestial powers. The proper ordering of time, the regular succession of months and seasons, was part of the cosmic order that the gods maintained. Disrupting this order, interfering with the proper cycles of time, would have serious consequences for the world below. Mėnuo's character, as revealed in folk tradition, showed interesting contrasts with Saulė's consistency. Where she was steady, constant, and predictable in her daily journey, he was changeable, displaying different faces and different levels of strength throughout his monthly cycle. Where she represented brightness, warmth, and open clarity, he was associated with the dimmer, cooler, more ambiguous light of nighttime, with shadows and partial visibility rather than full illumination. Where she embodied feminine virtue and maternal compassion, he displayed characteristics that were more complex and morally ambiguous. This is not to say that Mėnuo was evil or malevolent. He was not a dark god or a figure of wickedness in the way that demons and evil spirits were conceived. Rather, he was a legitimate deity with important cosmic functions, honored and respected by the Baltic peoples. But there was something about his nature that suggested instability, a tendency toward change that went beyond the mere physical waxing and waning of the lunar disk. Just as the moon showed different faces to the earth, never revealing more than one side, so too did the moon god perhaps harbor hidden aspects of his nature, characteristics not immediately visible but nonetheless present. Folk tradition sometimes portrayed Mėnuo in scenarios that suggested questionable judgment or problematic behavior even before the great betrayal. He was depicted as wandering, as being away from where he should be, as displaying interest in things that might not properly concern him. These subtle narrative elements in folk songs may have been influenced by the known story of his eventual transgression, or they may represent genuine elements of his character that foreshadowed what was to come. The relationship between Mėnuo and Saul before their marriage was described in various ways. Some traditions suggested they had known each other from the beginning, fellow celestial deities who shared the sky and whose paths crossed regularly. Others implied a more formal courtship period, a time when the moon god sought the hand of the sun goddess, making overtures and eventually proposing marriage. What remained consistent across versions was that their union was intended to be a cosmic wedding, a sacred marriage that would join the two great luminaries in harmonious partnership, creating a divine couple whose coordinated movements would regulate the heavens and bless the earth below. The concept of sacred marriage between sky and earth, or between complementary divine forces, was common in Indo-European and other mythological traditions. The joining of sun and moon in matrimony followed this pattern, bringing together day and night, light and shadow, constancy and change, in a union that would theoretically balance and harmonize these opposite principles. Such a marriage was not merely a personal matter between two divine individuals but a cosmic event with implications for the entire universe. The proper functioning of the celestial order, the regular progression of days and nights, the harmonious relationship between solar and lunar cycles, all depended on the success of this divine union. But even before the wedding, there may have been hints that Mėnuo was not entirely suited to the constant, faithful partnership that such a union required. His very nature as a changing, waxing and waning deity stood in some tension with the idea of permanent, stable marriage. His nocturnal realm, his association with shadows and partial visibility, his cyclical death and rebirth each month, all these characteristics marked him as fundamentally different from the steady, constant Saul. Whether these differences could be accommodated within the framework of marriage, whether the moon god could remain faithful to the sun goddess despite his changeable nature, these were questions that would soon be answered in the most dramatic and tragic way possible. Mėnuo, then, was a complex deity, essential to cosmic order yet somehow unstable within it, honored for his practical benefits yet exhibiting characteristics that suggested potential problems, associated with time and its measurement yet himself subject to constant change and transformation, paired with the steadfast sun goddess yet fundamentally different from her in nature and temperament. He was the moon god, wanderer of the night sky, measurer of months, patron of agriculture, father of stars, dressed in his starry gown, riding his gray horses through the darkness. He was about to enter into the most important relationship of his existence, a sacred marriage that would unite him with the radiant Saul. But this marriage would not lead to eternal harmony. Instead, it would end in betrayal, divine fury, and punishment that would echo through all of time, changing forever the nature of the cosmos and establishing the celestial order that continues to this day. The celestial family. The Baltic cosmos was not populated merely by Saul and Mėnuo, important though these two luminaries were. Around them existed an extensive celestial family, a complex network of divine relationships that gave structure and meaning to the observable heavens. The stars and planets visible in the night sky were not impersonal celestial objects but divine persons, gods and goddesses with their own identities, characters and roles in the cosmic drama. To fully understand the story of the sun and moon, we must become acquainted with this celestial family, particularly the daughters of Saul who would feature so prominently in the events about to unfold. Chief among these celestial children was Osrine, the morning star. Her name derives from the Lithuanian word osra, meaning dawn, and she was intimately connected to that liminal time when night gives way to day, when darkness retreats and light begins to spread across the sky. In Latvian tradition she was known as Ozeklis, fulfilling the same role. Astronomically, Osrine was the planet Venus when it appeared in the eastern sky before sunrise, that brilliant point of light that heralds the approach of dawn, outshining all other stars and planets except for the sun and moon themselves. Osrine was described as extraordinarily beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful of all celestial beings except for Saul herself. Her beauty was not merely physical but radiant, luminous, a beauty of light and brilliance that captivated all who beheld her. In the hour before dawn, when she appeared in the eastern sky, her brightness was such that she sometimes seemed to rival her mother the sun, though of course she was far less powerful. This exceptional beauty, this capacity to shine with such intensity that she dominated the pre-dawn sky, would prove to be both her glory and her curse. The role of Osrine in the daily cosmic cycle was crucial and clearly defined. She served as the herald of the sun, the announcer who appeared first to warn the world that Saul was approaching. When Osrine rose in the morning sky, this was the signal that the sun would soon follow, that the night was nearly over, and that day was about to begin. This gave her an important position as an intermediary between night and day, darkness and light, the realm of the moon and the realm of the sun. But Osrine was not merely a passive herald. Folk traditions described her active participation in preparing for the sun's arrival. She would rise early before her mother and would light the fire for Saul, heating the celestial sauna or making ready the sun's dwelling for another day. She would sometimes be described as making Saul's bed or performing other domestic tasks that readied the goddess for her daily journey. This service role cast Osrine as a dutiful daughter, devoted to her mother, assisting with the practical preparations necessary for the sun to rise and begin her course across the sky. In some versions of Baltic mythology, Osrine was described as married or betrothed to Mėnuo, the moon god, before his union with Saul. This created a complex relationship triangle that added layers of meaning to the subsequent betrayal. If Osrine had been or was supposed to be Mėnuo's wife, then his marriage to Saul represented a rejection of the morning star in favor of her mother, adding the sting of romantic abandonment to the family drama. Alternatively, some traditions suggested that Osrine and Mėnuo were involved in some other form of relationship, either consummated or contemplated, that complicated the later events. The question of whether Osrine was actually Saul's daughter or a separate goddess who was merely associated with the sun is somewhat complex. In many folk songs and traditions, she is clearly identified as Saul's daughter, one of several celestial children born to the sun goddess. In others, she appears more as a separate divine being, perhaps a sister or companion to Saul rather than her offspring. For purposes of the primary narrative about Saul and Mėnuo, the tradition that makes Osrine the daughter is most common and most dramatic, for it means that Mėnuo's eventual transgression involved not merely another goddess but his own daughter, his wife's child, adding the horror of incest to the crime of infidelity. Counterbalancing Osrine was her sister or counterpart Vakarine, the evening star. Her name derives from Vakaras, meaning evening, and she appeared in the western sky after sunset, the same planet Venus but in its evening manifestation. In Latvian tradition she might be called Vakara, and her role mirrored that of her morning sister but in reverse. Where Osrine heralded the beginning of day, Vakarine announced the onset of night. Where Osrine prepared Saul for her journey, Vakarine prepared her bed at journey's end. The folk traditions described Vakarine as making ready Saul's sleeping place, smoothing the coverings, arranging the pillows, ensuring that when the sun goddess completed her daily journey and descended below the western horizon, she would find rest and comfort waiting. This evening star was thus associated with rest, sleep, and the transition from active day to restful night. She marked the boundary between the time of light and the time of darkness, just as her sister marked the opposite transition. The relationship between Osrine and Vakarine is particularly interesting from a mythological perspective because, astronomically, they are the same celestial object. The planet Venus, which appears as either the morning star or the evening star depending on its position relative to the sun. Ancient peoples observed that one bright star appeared before sunrise while another appeared after sunset, and it was not immediately obvious that these were the same planetary body seen at different times. Some cultures developed myths recognizing their identity, while others treated them as separate entities. In Baltic tradition, they were conceived as separate divine persons, two sisters who performed complementary roles at opposite ends of the day. Beyond Osrine and Vakarine, Saul had other celestial daughters who were identified with various planets and astronomical phenomena. Indruja was associated with Jupiter, the largest planet and the brightest object in the night sky after Venus and the Moon. Her name may derive from the same Indo-European root that gives us the Vedic god Indra, suggesting ancient connections between Baltic and Indo-Iranian mythological traditions. Indruja's role in the celestial family is less clearly defined in surviving sources, but her identification with Jupiter, the king of planets, suggests she held a position of some importance among the sun's daughters. Selija was identified with Saturn, the ringed planet that appears as a steady, somewhat dimmer light in the night sky. The name Selija may connect to the Selonian people, one of the Baltic tribes, or to other linguistic roots. Saturn's slower movement across the sky compared to faster planets like Venus and Jupiter, and its dimmer appearance, may have influenced how this daughter was characterized in folk belief, though specific details about her mythological personality are scarce in surviving sources. Xystra represented Mars, the red planet associated with war and conflict in many mythological traditions. The reddish color of Mars, caused by iron oxide on its surface, has led many cultures to associate it with blood, war, and violence. Whether Baltic tradition attributed martial characteristics to Xystra is not entirely clear from surviving sources, but the identification of a celestial daughter with this distinctive planet is well established. Vivra was Mercury, the planet closest to the sun and therefore visible only briefly after sunset or before sunrise, never straying far from the sun's position in the sky. This close association with Saul made Vivra, in a sense, the daughter who stayed nearest to her mother, never wandering far from her side. The name Vivra may relate to words for guiding or leading, perhaps reflecting Mercury's role as the closest companion to the sun in its celestial journey. These planetary daughters represented more than mere astronomical identification. They personified the ancient Baltic understanding of celestial mechanics, the observation that certain bright lights in the sky move differently from the fixed stars, following their own paths and schedules. These wandering stars, as planets were understood in many ancient cultures, required explanation, and Baltic mythology provided that explanation by making them family members of the great sun goddess, each following her own course but all remaining connected to their radiant mother. Among all of Saul's children, however, one held a special position that transcended the celestial realm and connected directly to human life. This was Zemina, the earth goddess, whose name literally means earth or land in Baltic languages. Zemina was understood to be the daughter of Saul, making the earth itself a child of the sun, a divine being who was simultaneously terrestrial and celestial, both ground beneath feet and goddess in the heavens. Zemina's role in Baltic mythology and religion was profound and multifaceted. As the earth goddess, she represented the entire physical world, the soil, the land, the ground upon which all terrestrial life existed. She was the source of fertility, the provider of crops, the foundation upon which farms and homes were built. Fields belonged to her, forests grew under her care, and mountains rose from her body. Every growing thing derived its nourishment from her substance, every creature walked upon her surface, and every human life was lived out upon her body. The relationship between Zemina and Saul was understood as fundamentally complementary and mutually necessary. The sun provided warmth and light from above, while the earth provided substance and nourishment from below. Together, mother and daughter created the conditions for life. Without Saul's warmth, Zemina would be frozen and lifeless. Without Zemina's fertility, Saul's light would shine on barren emptiness. Their cooperation was essential to the flourishing of the world. But Zemina was also understood to be the daughter of Mėnuo, at least in some traditions, making her the child of both the sun and the moon, born from the union of these two great celestial powers. This parentage was significant because it meant that both Saul and Mėnuo had a direct stake in the welfare of the earth and its inhabitants. Zemina was their mutual daughter, the product of their union, the living embodiment of their relationship. What happened to the marriage of sun and moon would therefore directly affect their shared child, and both would wish to maintain connection with her. Folk tradition described Zemina in various ways. Sometimes she appeared as a blooming or greening goddess, covered in flowers and vegetation, embodying the lush fertility of spring and summer. Other times she was depicted as more matronly and substantial, a solid, dependable presence who provided foundations and stability. Her color associations were naturally green and brown, the colors of growing plants and fertile soil. She was invoked in agricultural rituals with prayers and offerings made directly to the earth, asking for good harvests and protection from crop failures. The worship of Zemina involved specific practices that reflected her terrestrial nature. Libations of beer or other liquids were poured directly onto the ground as offerings to her. Farmers would kneel and kiss the earth before planting or after harvest, showing respect and gratitude. Special ceremonies were performed in fields, with prayers spoken directly to the soil, asking Zemina's blessing on the seeds being planted. The earth itself was understood to hear these prayers, for it was not inert matter but the body of a living goddess who could respond to human petition. The relationship between Zemina and Perkunas, the thunder god, was also significant. In many traditions, Perkunas was described as Zemina's husband, forming the classical Indo-European pairing of Sky Father and Earth Mother. The spring thunder, which was understood as Perkunas' awakening from winter dormancy, was simultaneously the god's mating with the earth, fertilizing Zemina with his lightning and rain so that crops could grow. This sacred marriage between thunder and earth was celebrated each spring when the first storms arrived, marking the renewal of fertility and the beginning of the growing season. This meant that Zemina had complex familial relationships extending throughout the Baltic pantheon. She was daughter to both Saul and Mėnuo, making her a child of the celestial realm. She was wife to Perkunas, connecting her to the thunder god who would soon play such a crucial role in cosmic events. Through these relationships, Zemina served as a linking figure between different divine realms and different generations of gods, connecting heaven and earth, old and young, masculine and feminine principles in the divine cosmos. Beyond these major figures, the celestial family included numerous other divine or semi-divine beings. The fixed stars themselves were sometimes understood as lesser children of the sun or as attendants and servants of the great celestial deities. Different constellations had their own identities and roles in folk astronomy. The Milky Way had specific mythological significance, sometimes described as a path or road across the heavens, along which divine beings traveled or which marked the boundary between different celestial realms. Shooting stars and meteors were understood as celestial events with divine significance. Some traditions held that shooting stars were messengers from the gods, carrying information or divine will from one part of the heavens to another. Others saw them as fallen stars, divine beings who had somehow transgressed and been cast down from their celestial positions. The appearance of shooting stars might be seen as omens, signs that should be interpreted to understand what the gods were communicating. Comets, those strange wandering objects that appeared unpredictably in the sky with their long tails, were often viewed with awe and some fear. Their irregular appearances and distinctive forms set them apart from the regular, predictable movements of sun, moon, planets, and stars. They might be understood as divine messengers announcing important events, or as portents of change, disruption, or disaster. The ancient Balts, like many peoples, paid careful attention to comets and attempted to interpret their meanings. The aurora borealis, visible in the northern reaches of the Baltic region, was another celestial phenomenon requiring mythological explanation. These dancing lights in the northern sky might be understood as divine beings engaged in activity, as the souls of the dead, as emanations from divine realms beyond the normal sky, or as signs of cosmic events occurring in heavenly spaces. The shifting, colorful nature of the aurora, its unpredictability and beauty, marked it as something special, something that revealed the active presence of divine forces in the cosmos. This extensive celestial family served important functions in Baltic religion and cosmology. First, it provided explanations for observed astronomical phenomena. Every light in the sky, every movement of celestial objects, could be understood as the activity of divine persons going about their business. The cosmos was not empty space punctuated by inert objects but a populated realm where gods lived and acted, where relationships developed and conflicts emerged, where stories unfolded across the vault of heaven. Second, the celestial family provided a structure of relationships and interactions that mirrored and informed human social organization. The gods had families, marriages, parent-child relationships, sibling connections, and all the complex dynamics that human families experienced. Divine parents cared for their children as human parents should. Divine marriages could be harmonious or could fail, just as human marriages might succeed or founder. The lessons learned from divine family dynamics could be applied to understanding and managing human family life. Third, the celestial family established a hierarchy and order in the cosmos that reflected and justified social hierarchies on Earth. The supreme god Dyaus stood at the top, with other deities arranged in descending order of importance and power. Some gods had greater authority, others served in subordinate roles. Some divine beings had wide-ranging powers and responsibilities, others had more limited, specialized functions. This divine hierarchy provided a model for human social organization, suggesting that hierarchy itself was natural and divinely ordained. Fourth, the celestial family created a network of divine patronage and specialization that humans could navigate according to their needs. Different gods and goddesses had responsibility for different aspects of life and nature. If you needed rain for your crops, you prayed to Perkunas. If you needed healing or protection, you appealed to Saul. If you were embarking on a journey, you might invoke the protection of various divine beings associated with travel and roads. This specialized divine bureaucracy made the religious system practically useful, providing clear protocols for addressing different problems and needs. The celestial children of Saul, particularly the daughters identified with planets and stars, also served educational functions. By naming and characterizing these celestial objects as divine persons, Baltic mythology created a memorable framework for astronomical observation. People would watch for Osrine in the morning, knowing that the sun would soon follow. They would note the position of Indruja or Selija in the night sky, using these markers to track the passage of seasons. The appearance or disappearance of various celestial daughters throughout the year provided a calendar system that structured agricultural activities and religious observances. Furthermore, the stories told about the celestial family, including the dramatic narrative we are exploring, serve to encode and transmit important cultural values. The way divine beings related to each other, the consequences of proper or improper behavior, the rewards of virtue and punishments of transgression, all these narrative elements taught moral lessons and social norms. Children growing up in Baltic society would learn the stories of Saul and her daughters, of Mėnuo and his failings, of Perkunas and his justice, and through these stories would internalize the values and expectations of their culture. The celestial family was also important for understanding the structure of time and the cycles of nature. The daily appearance of sun followed by moon, the monthly waxing and waning of the lunar disk, the annual circuit of the sun through the seasons, the movements of planets among the fixed stars, all these rhythms and cycles were understood as the activities of divine persons following their appointed courses. Time itself was not abstract but was constituted by the movements and relationships of the celestial family. To understand time was to understand the gods and their interactions. The practical religiosity of the Baltic peoples meant that the celestial family was not merely a subject of mythological speculation but was intimately involved in daily life. Farmers timed their activities by the positions and phases of celestial deities. Travelers navigated by the stars, understanding them as divine guides who could be called upon for assistance. Women bearing children appealed to Saul as the divine mother who understood the pain and danger of childbirth. Sick people sought healing from celestial powers whose warmth and light could drive away disease. This immediate, practical relationship with the celestial deities made them real in a way that more abstract theological concepts could never achieve. These were not distant philosophical principles or intellectual abstractions but living divine persons who could see human activities, hear human prayers, and respond to human needs. When you looked up at the morning star, you were seeing Osrine herself, not merely an astronomical object but a divine person going about her duties. When the sun shone on your face, that was Saul's literal touch, her presence made tangible through sensation and warmth. The celestial family, then, formed the context in which the great drama of Saul and Mėnuo would unfold. These were not isolated individuals but members of an extended divine kinship network, connected by bonds of parentage, marriage, sibling relationships, and mutual responsibilities. What happened between the sun and moon would affect not only themselves but their daughters, their divine relatives, and ultimately the entire structure of the cosmos. The betrayal that was about to occur would not be a private matter between two individuals but a cosmic catastrophe that would require divine intervention, punishment, and the complete restructuring of celestial relationships to restore proper order. The stage was set, the divine actors were in place, and the greatest tragedy of Baltic mythology was about to begin. The Heavenly Wedding. The decision to unite Saul and Mėnuo in sacred marriage was an event of tremendous cosmic significance. This was not simply a union between two individuals but a joining of the two greatest celestial powers, the two luminaries that govern day and night, the two divine forces whose regular movements structured all of existence. The wedding of the sun and moon promised to bring perfect harmony to the heavens, coordinating the movements of day and night, synchronizing the solar and lunar cycles, and establishing a divine partnership that would bless the earth below with fertility, order, and prosperity. The decision to marry may have originated with Dievas himself, the supreme Sky Father who maintained ultimate authority over cosmic affairs. It would have seemed natural and appropriate to join the two great lights in matrimony, creating a divine couple whose complementary natures would balance and enhance each other. Alternatively, the marriage may have been arranged by other divine powers, or perhaps Mėnuo himself courted Saul, seeking her hand and eventually winning her agreement to the union. The exact circumstances of how the marriage was decided vary somewhat across different traditions, but all agree that the wedding took place and that it was intended to be permanent and binding. Preparations for this celestial wedding must have been elaborate and magnificent, befitting the status of the divine couple. Saul, already radiant and beautiful, would have been adorned with even more splendor for her wedding day. Her golden garments would have been specially prepared, new ornaments crafted, her crown polished to highest brilliance. Her daughters, the planetary goddesses and stars, would have attended her, helping with preparations, offering advice and assistance, ensuring that the sun goddess appeared in full glory for her nuptials. Mėnuo too would have prepared himself for this momentous occasion. His starry gown would have been arranged to maximum effect, his gray horses groomed and decorated, his chariot polished and readied. As the groom, he would have been expected to present himself in worthy fashion, demonstrating that he was fit to be the husband of the great Saul, proving himself deserving of such an honored position. The location of the wedding is described in various ways in folk traditions. Some accounts place it in the heavens themselves, in a celestial hall or sacred space where gods gathered for important ceremonies. Others suggest it took place on earth, perhaps on a sacred mountain or hilltop, a place where heaven and earth met and where divine beings could manifest to perform sacred rites. Still other traditions imply that the wedding occurred in multiple locations or in a cosmic space that transcended ordinary geographic categories, a mythological venue appropriate for such a momentous union. The guest list for this wedding would have included the most important deities of the Baltic pantheon. Dievas, the Sky Father, certainly attended, likely serving as the primary authority overseeing the ceremony. His presence would have sanctified the marriage, giving it the weight of supreme divine approval. Perkunas, the thunder god and enforcer of cosmic law, was definitely present, a detail that would prove crucial to later events. His role at the wedding was apparently to serve as witness, guardian, and guarantor of the marriage vows. Some traditions describe him specifically as the best man, or primary groomsman, the one who stood beside Mėnuo and assured the proper conduct of the ceremony. Zemina, the earth goddess and daughter of the couple being married, would certainly have been present at her parents' wedding. Other celestial children, including Osrine, Vakarine, and the various planetary goddesses, would have attended as well. These daughters served as attendants to Saul, perhaps as bridesmaids in the celestial wedding party, honoring their mother and welcoming their new stepfather into the family. Other divine beings from the Baltic pantheon would have been invited to witness this cosmic event. Vajas, the wind god, may have attended, his presence perhaps accounting for any breezes that accompanied the ceremony. Gabija, the fire goddess, whose domain overlapped with Saul's solar heat, would likely have been invited. Numerous lesser deities, spirits, and divine attendants would have been present, filling the cosmic wedding hall with divine witnesses to this sacred union. The marriage ceremony itself would have followed whatever protocols govern divine weddings in Baltic cosmology. There would have been formal declarations, the exchange of vows, perhaps the exchange of symbolic items or tokens representing the commitment being made. The language of the ceremony would have been suitably grand and formal, befitting the cosmic significance of what was occurring. Both Saul and Mėnuo would have spoken their promises, pledging faithfulness, committing to their shared responsibilities, vowing to honor the sacred bond being created. Perkunas, in his role as witness and guarantor, would have heard these vows with particular attention. As the enforcer of divine law and cosmic order, he was not merely a passive observer but an active participant whose presence meant that these vows were binding and enforceable. To break promises made before Perkunas was to invite his wrath and his thunderbolts. He stood as the ultimate guarantee that this marriage would be honored, that neither party would violate the sacred trust being established. His presence transformed the wedding from a mere celebration into a cosmic contract, a fundamental restructuring of the heavenly order that could not be casually dissolved or ignored. The celebration following the marriage vows would have been magnificent beyond human comprehension. Divine feasts were laid out, with ambrosia and nectar, the foods of the gods, served in abundance. Music filled the heavens, perhaps played by divine musicians or perhaps consisting of the music of the spheres, the cosmic harmony produced by the movements of celestial bodies. Dancing would have taken place, with gods and goddesses joining in joyous movement to celebrate the union of sun and moon. Saul herself was described in folk songs as dancing at her wedding, her golden slippers flashing as she moved across the silver hills of heaven. The image of the sun goddess dancing in celebration, radiant in her wedding finery, surrounded by her daughters and honored guests, captures the joy and hope that accompanied this marriage. It seemed that a new era of cosmic harmony was beginning, that the coordination of sun and moon in sacred marriage would bring unprecedented blessings to the world below. The wedding night would have followed the celebration, the private consummation of the marriage that sealed the union in the most intimate and binding way. This sacred joining of sun and moon had cosmic implications, for their union represented the merging of day and night, light and shadow, constancy and change. From this marriage, continued fertility and prosperity were expected to flow to the earth below. Zemina, already their daughter in some traditions, was confirmed in her position as the child of this cosmic couple. Future celestial offspring might have been anticipated, new divine beings born from the union of the two greatest lights. The period immediately following the wedding should have been a honeymoon phase, a time of harmony and mutual devotion as the divine couple settled into their new relationship. Saul would continue her daily journey across the sky, now as a married goddess, secure in her union with the moon god. Mėnuo would continue his nightly course, traveling in coordination with his wife, their movements synchronized by the bonds of matrimony. Day and night, sun and moon, light and darkness, all would be harmonized through this sacred marriage. The earth below would benefit from this celestial harmony. Agricultural cycles would proceed smoothly, with solar warmth and lunar influence coordinating to produce optimal growing conditions. Seasonal transitions would occur at their proper times. The balance between day and night, between periods of light and darkness, would be maintained in perfect equilibrium. The divine couple's blessing would extend to human marriages as well, with Saul and Mėnuo serving as the ideal model of proper matrimony, demonstrating through their union how husbands and wives should relate to each other. But even in the midst of celebration, even during the wedding itself, there may have been hints of trouble to come. Folk traditions sometimes describe Mėnuo's gaze wandering during the ceremony, his attention drawn to other divine beings present at the celebration. Some accounts suggest that even during the wedding feast, the moon god's eyes lingered on Osrine, the morning star, whose beauty was so remarkable that it could distract even a groom from his bride. Osrine herself, dutiful daughter attending her mother's wedding, would have been present in all her radiant glory. As the brightest celestial object after the sun and moon themselves, her luminosity would have been evident to all present. Her youth and beauty, her vital energy and brilliance, may have created a contrast with Saul's more mature grandeur. Where the sun goddess was powerful, established, the great mother and sovereign, Osrine was young, fresh, perhaps representing a different kind of beauty that appealed to some fundamental aspect of Mėnuo's changeable nature. Whether the attraction was immediate or developed over time, whether Mėnuo noticed Osrine during the wedding or only later as he saw her each morning heralding his wife's approach, the seeds of disaster were present from the beginning. The moon god's inconstant nature, his tendency toward change and transformation, his association with waxing and waning rather than steady constancy, all these characteristics that defined his very being were fundamentally at odds with the permanence and faithfulness required by sacred marriage. Perkunas, standing witness at the wedding, would have been vigilant even during the celebration. His role as enforcer of divine law meant he was always watching, always attentive to potential violations of cosmic order. Did he notice Mėnuo's wandering gaze? Did he sense something unstable in the moon god's character that suggested future problems? Or was he simply aware that his presence as guardian would be necessary, that the vows being made would need enforcement, that his thunderbolts might eventually be required to punish transgression and restore proper order? The wedding gifts presented to the divine couple would have been magnificent and symbolically significant. Daivas might have given his blessing and authority, confirming the marriage as ordained by the supreme power. Other gods would have brought gifts appropriate to their domains, tools of cosmic governance, symbols of fertility and prosperity, tokens of divine favor and support. These gifts were not merely decorative but represented the cosmic powers being invested in the marriage, the hopes and expectations that this union would fulfill its cosmic purpose. Among these gifts may have been items that would later gain ironic significance. Perhaps Mėnuo received a crown or ornament marking his new status as husband of the sun goddess, an item that would later be seen as undeserved, worn under false pretenses by one unworthy of the honor. Perhaps Saul received symbolic items representing the trust and faith she was placing in her husband, items that would later serve as painful reminders of betrayal and broken vows. The cosmic significance of this wedding cannot be overstated. In Baltic cosmology, as in many ancient mythological systems, the proper ordering of the cosmos depended on correct relationships among divine beings. Marriages, particularly sacred marriages between major deities, were not personal matters but cosmic arrangements that structured the fundamental operations of the universe. The marriage of sky and earth, for instance, was essential to fertility and agricultural prosperity. Similarly, the marriage of sun and moon was meant to harmonize the two great cycles of time, the daily progression of sunrise and sunset with the monthly waxing and waning of the lunar disk. The failure of this marriage, therefore, would not simply be a personal tragedy but a cosmic catastrophe. If sun and moon could not maintain proper relationship with each other, if the two great lights were in conflict rather than harmony, this would disrupt the very foundations of the cosmic order. Time itself might become disordered. The balance between day and night might be thrown into chaos. The blessings that flowed from divine harmony to the earth below might be interrupted or corrupted. This is why Perkuna's role as witness and guarantor was so crucial. His presence at the wedding meant that the cosmic order itself was invested in this marriage, that the proper functioning of the universe required its success, and that any violation would be met with the full force of divine justice. The thunder god's thunderbolts were not merely weapons of punishment but instruments of cosmic correction, tools used to restore proper order when it had been disrupted by transgression. The wedding of Saul and Mėnuo thus represented a moment of great hope and great vulnerability. The hope was that this union would usher in a new era of cosmic perfection, with the two great lights working in coordinated harmony to bless the world below. The vulnerability was that so much depended on the character and faithfulness of the moon god, on his ability to maintain constant devotion despite his fundamentally inconstant nature, on his capacity to honor his vows despite the temptations that would inevitably arise. As the wedding celebration concluded and the divine guests departed, as Saul and Mėnuo began their married life together, the cosmos held its breath. The marriage had been properly conducted, the vows had been spoken before the highest powers, the witnesses had heard and would remember. Now it remained to be seen whether this sacred union would endure, whether the moon god would prove worthy of the sun goddess, whether the cosmic order established through this marriage would remain stable and harmonious. The answer to these questions would come soon enough, and it would shake the very foundations of heaven, leading to punishment, sorrow, and a complete restructuring of the celestial realm that would establish the cosmic order we still observe today. Osrinus' beauty and the seeds of discord. To understand how the heavenly marriage came to ruin, we must look more closely at Osrine, the morning star, whose beauty would become the catalyst for cosmic catastrophe. This divine daughter of Saul was not merely beautiful but possessed a quality of radiance and luminosity that set her apart even among celestial beings, making her the object of desire and the unwitting cause of the greatest betrayal in Baltic mythology. The beauty of Osrine was fundamentally linked to her astronomical nature. As the planet Venus in its morning manifestation, Osrine appeared in the eastern sky before sunrise as the brightest object visible except for the sun and moon themselves. Venus outshines all other planets and stars by a considerable margin, its brilliance unmistakable to even casual observers. This physical brightness translated in mythological terms into exceptional beauty, a loveliness so remarkable that it captivated all who beheld it. Folk songs described Osrine in terms that emphasized her luminous quality. She shone like silver, glittered like diamonds, sparkled with crystalline purity. Her light was white and clear, different from the golden warmth of her mother Saul but equally magnificent in its own way. Where the sun goddess was mature and powerful, radiating warmth and life-giving energy, Osrine was young and pure, her light crisp and clean, heralding the dawn without the overwhelming intensity of full daylight. The morning star appeared in the pre-dawn sky during that liminal time when night was giving way to day but full daylight had not yet arrived. This transitional moment, neither completely dark nor fully light, gave Osrine a special character. She belonged neither entirely to night nor completely to day but existed in the boundary between them. This made her mysterious and alluring, a creature of thresholds and transitions, appearing at that magical hour when the world was transforming from darkness to light. Her role as herald of the sun meant that Osrine appeared first, before her mother, commanding the pre-dawn sky in solitary splendor. For a brief period each morning, she was the brightest thing visible, more luminous than any star or planet, dominating the eastern horizon. Only after she had shone for a time would Saul herself appear, and as the sun rose, Osrine's light would be overwhelmed by her mother's greater brilliance, fading from visibility as daylight filled the sky. This daily pattern, where Osrine briefly outshone everything else before being eclipsed by her mother, created a complex dynamic between the two goddesses. Folk tradition sometimes portrayed Saul as jealous of her daughter's brightness, uncomfortable with the way Osrine could momentarily seem more brilliant than the sun herself. This jealousy was not malicious or petty but reflected the competitive nature of their relationship, the tension between mother and daughter, between established power and youthful vitality. The songs described Saul's mixed feelings about her daughter's exceptional beauty. On one hand, the sun goddess was proud of Osrine, pleased that her daughter was so magnificent, happy that such a radiant being served as her herald and prepared for her arrival. On the other hand, there was discomfort with being overshadowed, even briefly, even by one's own child. Some dainas depicted Saul as complaining about Osrine's brightness, suggesting that the daughter was too brilliant, that her light competed inappropriately with her mother's radiance. This tension between mother and daughter may have been exacerbated by their different types of beauty and different relationships to light. Saul's beauty was warm, nurturing, life-giving. Her golden light provided warmth and energy, made crops grow, sustained all life. Osrine's beauty was cooler, more ethereal, more purely luminous without the same life-sustaining warmth. Where Saul was the established maternal power, Osrine represented youthful potential, fresh and new, not yet fully developed but already showing remarkable brilliance. Folk tradition also suggested that Osrine was not merely passively beautiful but possessed qualities of character that enhanced her appeal. She was described as dutiful and hardworking, rising early each morning to perform her appointed tasks. She lit the fire for Saul, prepared the way for her mother's journey, never failing in her responsibilities despite the early hour and the repetitive nature of her duties. This combination of exceptional beauty with admirable character made her even more attractive, a goddess who was both lovely to behold and virtuous in behavior. The relationship between Osrine and Mėnuo before the sun goddess's marriage was complex and varied across different traditions. In some versions, Osrine had been betrothed or even married to Mėnuo before his marriage to Saul. This created a scenario where the moon god abandoned or rejected the morning star to marry her mother instead, adding layers of betrayal and abandonment to the eventual infidelity. Osrine would have had reason to feel wronged, passed over in favor of her own mother, her prior claim to Mėnuo's affection disregarded when he chose to pursue the more powerful sun goddess instead. In other traditions, Osrine and Mėnuo had no prior romantic connection but knew each other as family members, with Osrine understanding Mėnuo as her stepfather after his marriage to her mother. This created a different dynamic, where any romantic or sexual involvement between them would represent not merely infidelity but incest, the violation of family bonds and the corruption of proper kinship relationships. The horror of such transgression would be even greater than simple adultery, for it would represent a fundamental violation of the natural order that governed relationships between parents and children, step-parents and stepchildren. The daily cosmic routine brought Osrine and Mėnuo into regular contact in ways that may have facilitated the development of inappropriate feelings. Each morning, as Mėnuo was completing his nightly journey across the sky, preparing to descend below the western horizon, Osrine would appear in the east to herald the coming dawn. For a brief time, both moon and morning star would be visible simultaneously, the moon in the west preparing to set, the morning star in the east announcing the imminent sunrise. This daily meeting, this moment when their paths crossed and they shared the sky, created opportunities for interaction and the development of attraction. Imagine the scene from Mėnuo's perspective. Night after night he traveled across the dark sky, performing his appointed rounds, measuring time with his waxing and waning. His path was lonely, separate from his wife who traveled during the day when he was hidden below the horizon. Their marriage, despite its cosmic significance, may have felt distant and abstract, with little opportunity for actual companionship given that their duties kept them apart, one ruling day while the other governed night. Then each morning, as his journey neared its end and weariness from the night's travel set in, he would see Osrine rising in the east. She appeared fresh and vital, brilliant and beautiful, her light cutting through the last remnants of darkness. She was young where Saul was mature, cool where her mother was warm, ethereal where the sun goddess was substantial. She represented something different, something new and exciting, perhaps something that appealed to aspects of Mėnuo's changeable nature that his marriage to Saul left unsatisfied. For Osrine, the daily appearance of Mėnuo may have become significant in ways that were initially innocent but gradually grew problematic. She saw him each morning, became familiar with his presence, grew accustomed to the moment when their lights shared the sky. If she had previously been betrothed to him or had feelings for him before his marriage to her mother, Seeing him each day might have kept those emotions alive, preventing her from fully accepting his marriage to Saul and moving on to other attachments. Folk songs sometimes depicted Osrine as waiting for Mėnuo, watching for his appearance, timing her own rising to coincide with his setting. This could be understood innocently as proper coordination between celestial beings whose duties required synchronized timing. But it could also be read as something more problematic, as evidence of emotional attachment or romantic interest that should not exist between a stepfather and stepdaughter, between a married god and his wife's daughter. The beauty that made Osrine so celebrated also made her dangerous. Her radiance, which should have been a source of pride and joy, became instead a temptation and a threat. Through no fault of her own, simply by existing in her full luminous glory, she created a situation where cosmic order was endangered. Her daily appearance in the sky, necessary for her role as herald of dawn, brought her into regular contact with Mėnuo in ways that facilitated inappropriate attraction. This raises questions about responsibility and blame. Was Osrine at fault for being beautiful? Was she guilty of seduction simply by performing her appointed duties and appearing in her natural splendor? Or was the fault entirely Mėnuo's, a failure of his character and self-control, an inability to maintain proper boundaries despite his sacred vows? Different versions of the myth handle these questions differently, with some traditions placing more blame on Osrine while others hold Mėnuo almost entirely responsible. Some folk songs describe Osrine as actively seductive, as deliberately using her beauty to attract Mėnuo's attention, as seeking to win him away from her mother perhaps out of jealousy or revenge for being passed over. In these versions, the morning star becomes a more active agent in the betrayal, a schemer who deliberately undermines her mother's marriage and pursues her stepfather despite knowing the cosmic consequences. In these accounts, Osrine bears significant moral responsibility for what occurs, and the tragedy stems from her choices as much as from Mėnuo's weakness. Other traditions portray Osrine more sympathetically, as an innocent victim of circumstances beyond her control. She cannot help being beautiful, cannot change her essential nature as the brilliant morning star. She performs her duties faithfully, rising each morning to herald the sun, working diligently to serve her mother. If Mėnuo becomes obsessed with her, if his desire transgresses proper boundaries, this is his failing rather than hers. She may even resist his advances, reject his inappropriate attention, and find herself victimized by his persistence and eventual assault. The ambiguity in the folk tradition regarding Osrine's role reflects broader cultural tensions about female beauty, male desire, and responsibility for sexual transgression. Is a beautiful woman responsible for the desires she inspires in men, even when she has not actively sought to inspire them? Does her beauty itself constitute a form of seduction, or is desire purely the responsibility of the one who feels it? These questions, debated in many cultures across history, find expression in the varying accounts of Osrine's involvement in the cosmic betrayal. What seems clear across all versions is that Osrine's exceptional beauty created a situation of temptation and danger. Whether she actively exploited this beauty or was simply its innocent possessor, whether she welcomed Mėnuo's attention or was horrified by it, her radiant presence in the morning sky provided the occasion for cosmic catastrophe. The brightness that made her the herald of dawn also made her the object of forbidden desire, and this dual nature of her luminosity would lead to the greatest crisis in Baltic divine history. The jealousy that Saul may have felt toward her daughter's beauty takes on new significance in light of what was about to occur. Was this jealousy merely aesthetic, a mother's discomfort at being momentarily outshone by her offspring? Or was it something deeper, an intuitive awareness of danger, a sensing that this exceptional beauty posed a threat not merely to Saul's status as the most radiant goddess but to her marriage itself? Did the sun goddess recognize, perhaps unconsciously, that her daughter's brilliance might attract her husband's wandering eye? Folk songs sometimes describe Saul as warning Osrine, telling her daughter to dim her light, to shine less brightly, to avoid drawing too much attention to herself. These maternal warnings could be interpreted as petty jealousy, a powerful goddess trying to diminish her daughter's glory out of insecurity. But they could also be understood as protective measures, a mother trying to shield her daughter from the dangerous consequences of excessive beauty, attempting to prevent a situation where that beauty might lead to disaster. The relationship between mother and daughter may have been strained by this underlying tension. Osrine might have resented her mother's jealousy, felt that she was being unfairly blamed for possessing the beauty she was born with. Saul might have been frustrated by her daughter's apparent inability to recognize the dangers her radiance created. These small domestic tensions in the celestial household, these minor conflicts between mother and daughter, may have contributed to the larger catastrophe by creating an environment where proper boundaries and relationships were already somewhat compromised. The daily routine that brought Saulė and Mėnuo together each morning also meant that Saul was not present to observe their interactions. When the morning star rose in the east and the moon was setting in the west, the sun had not yet appeared above the horizon. Saul was still below the earth, perhaps resting in her castle beyond the sea, perhaps traveling through the underworld in her boat chariot, preparing for another day's journey but not yet visible in the sky. This meant that whatever transpired between her husband and her daughter during those pre-dawn moments occurred outside her direct observation, in a space where her light did not yet reach and her presence did not yet govern. This absence of oversight may have emboldened Mėnuo, made him feel that his actions were hidden and private, that he could pursue his inappropriate desire without immediate consequences. The darkness or semi-darkness of the pre-dawn hours, when full sunlight had not yet arrived to illuminate everything clearly, provided both literal and metaphorical cover for transgression. What happened in the shadows before the full light of day might seem to belong to a different realm, governed by different rules, not subject to the same standards as actions performed in broad daylight under the sun's direct gaze. But of course, nothing was truly hidden from divine observation. Even if Saul herself did not directly witness the developing attraction between her husband and daughter, other celestial beings observed what was occurring. The stars, attendants and servants of the heavenly realm, saw everything that transpired in the night sky. The winds carried sounds and whispers. Divine messengers moved between different parts of the cosmos, bringing news and information. And most importantly, Perkunas, the thunder god and enforcer of divine justice, maintained his eternal vigilance, watching for violations of cosmic order that would require his intervention. The seeds of discord were thus thoroughly planted. Mėnuo's changeable nature, predisposed toward inconstancy despite his sacred marriage vows. Saulė's exceptional beauty, creating temptation whether she intended it or not. The daily celestial routine that brought them together in the pre-dawn sky, providing opportunity for forbidden attraction to develop. Saulė's absence during these crucial moments, unable to observe and intervene. The underlying tensions in the celestial family, the jealousies and resentments that compromised proper relationships. All these factors combined to create a situation where cosmic catastrophe became increasingly likely. The question that haunted the heavens during this period was not whether transgression would occur but when. Would Mėnuo control his desires, honor his vows, resist the temptation that Saulė's beauty presented? Would Saulė maintain appropriate boundaries with her stepfather, reject any inappropriate advances, report any concerning behavior to her mother? Would someone intervene before disaster struck, recognizing the danger and taking action to prevent the violation of cosmic order? Or would all the elements aligning toward catastrophe proceed to their inevitable conclusion, with desire overcoming duty, temptation defeating virtue, and the sacred bonds of marriage being shattered by forbidden passion? The cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath during this period of mounting tension. The regular movements of sun and moon continued as always, their courses across the sky proceeding according to the eternal patterns established at creation. But beneath this surface regularity, dangerous currents were flowing, threatening to disrupt everything. The marriage of Saul and Mėnuo, which should have brought harmony and coordination to the heavenly realm, instead created opportunities for betrayal. The beauty of Saulė, which should have been celebrated as a glory of creation, instead became a source of temptation and danger. The very structures meant to maintain cosmic order were becoming the instruments of its potential destruction. Folk wisdom preserved in the songs and stories recognized that beauty could be a double-edged gift, bringing both blessing and curse to its possessor. The most beautiful women in Baltic tradition often faced the most difficult challenges, their attractiveness creating problems as much as opportunities. Saulė embodied this paradox perfectly. Her radiance made her celebrated throughout the cosmos, gave her an important role as herald of the dawn, marked her as one of the great celestial goddesses. But that same radiance made her the object of forbidden desire, endangered her relationships with both mother and stepfather, and ultimately led to cosmic catastrophe that affected not just her but the entire structure of heaven and earth. The morning star continued to rise each day, performing her duties faithfully, announcing the approach of dawn with her brilliant light. The moon continued his nightly journey, waxing and waning according to his nature, measuring the passage of time with his regular cycles. The sun continued her daily course, rising in the east and setting in the west, providing warmth and light to the world below. On the surface all seemed normal and orderly, but those who looked closely, who paid attention to the subtle signs and portents, might have sensed that something was wrong, that the cosmic harmony established through the heavenly wedding was already beginning to unravel, that forces had been set in motion that would lead inevitably to betrayal, punishment, and the complete restructuring of the celestial realm. The stage was fully set for the great tragedy of Baltic mythology. All the elements were in place: the sacred marriage that should have been permanent, the exceptional beauty that created temptation, the daily routine that provided opportunity, the divine enforcer who would eventually be called upon to restore order. What remained was for events to unfold, for desire to overcome restraint, for the transgression to occur that would require divine punishment and would establish forever the cosmic order we observe today, where sun and moon never share the sky except in those rare moments of eclipse, where the moon's face bears the marks of its punishment, where the eternal dance of the celestial lights continues under the watchful eye of the thunder god who stands ready to enforce the laws of the cosmos. The betrayal, Mėnuo's infidelity. The moment of greatest cosmic significance in Baltic mythology arrived when Mėnuo violated his sacred marriage vows and betrayed the sun goddess Saul. This was not merely an act of personal infidelity but a transgression that shook the very foundations of the cosmic order, disrupted the harmony of the heavens, and required immediate divine intervention to prevent complete chaos. The exact nature and circumstances of this betrayal varied somewhat across different regional traditions and folk songs, but all versions agreed on the fundamental fact. The moon god committed adultery, and the object of his forbidden desire was Osrine, the morning star. The timing of the betrayal is described differently in various accounts. Some traditions place it during the wedding celebration itself, suggesting that even in the midst of the marriage ceremony, even as he was speaking his vows to Saul, Mėnuo's attention wandered to Osrine. This version emphasizes the shocking audacity of the transgression, the complete lack of respect for the sacred nature of the marriage ceremony, and the immediate violation of promises barely finished being spoken. To betray one's bride during the wedding itself, to commit adultery before the marriage has even been consummated, represents the ultimate degree of faithlessness and dishonor. Other accounts suggest that the betrayal occurred shortly after the wedding, during what should have been the honeymoon period when the newly married couple was establishing their relationship and learning to live together as husband and wife. This version allows for some time to pass between the marriage vows and the violation, perhaps making the betrayal slightly less shocking in its timing but no less devastating in its consequences. The moon god may have initially tried to honor his commitments, struggled against his inappropriate desires, but eventually succumbed to temptation and pursued the forbidden relationship with his stepdaughter. Still other traditions imply that the betrayal developed more gradually, that Mėnuo's marriage to Saul continued for some period before the relationship with Osrine crossed the line from inappropriate attraction to actual infidelity. In these versions, there may have been an extended period of emotional infidelity, of longing looks and suppressed desires, before physical transgression occurred. This interpretation makes the betrayal more psychologically complex, showing the moon god struggling with conflicting loyalties and eventually failing to maintain proper boundaries despite his awareness that what he was doing was wrong. The location of the betrayal also varied in folk tradition. Some accounts suggest it occurred in the heavens, in the celestial spaces where gods dwelled and performed their duties. Others place it on earth, perhaps on a mountaintop or sacred hilltop where heaven and earth met, where divine beings might descend to interact with the terrestrial realm. The ambiguity about location may reflect the cosmic nature of the transgression, which could not be contained in any single place but affected the entire universe, or it may simply represent variations in storytelling across different communities and time periods. More importantly than the details of timing and location, however, is the fundamental nature of what occurred. Mėnuo violated his sacred marriage vows. The exact form this violation took varied somewhat across traditions, reflecting different regional understandings or different levels of explicitness in storytelling. But all versions agreed that a serious transgression occurred, that proper boundaries were crossed, that relationships meant to be kept separate were inappropriately merged. In the versions where Osrine was understood as a separate goddess who had previously been betrothed or married to Mėnuo, the betrayal consisted of him abandoning his appropriate partner to marry her mother, and then returning to pursue Osrine after marrying Saul. This created a complex pattern of shifting loyalties and broken commitments, with Mėnuo unable to remain faithful to any relationship, driven by his changeable nature to constantly seek something different from what he currently possessed. But the most common and most dramatically significant version made Osrine the daughter of Saul, meaning that Mėnuo's transgression involved his stepdaughter. This added the element of incest to the crime of adultery, creating a double violation of natural and divine law. Not only was he breaking his marriage vows to Saul, but he was also corrupting the proper relationships within the family structure, treating his stepdaughter as a potential sexual partner rather than maintaining the appropriate parental boundary that should have governed their interaction. The question of Osrine's consent and participation remains somewhat ambiguous in folk tradition. Some versions portrayed her as a seductress who deliberately tempted Mėnuo, who exploited her beauty to win his attention, who perhaps sought revenge against her mother for Saul's jealousy or for Mėnuo's earlier rejection of her in favor of the sun goddess. In these accounts, Osrine bore significant moral responsibility for the betrayal, actively participating in the destruction of her mother's marriage. Other versions painted Osrine more sympathetically, as a victim of Mėnuo's predatory behavior. The moon god, unable to control his desires, pursued his stepdaughter despite her resistance and objections. He may have used his authority as her stepfather, his position as a powerful god, or his ability to encounter her during the pre-dawn hours when other divine beings were not present, to coerce or assault her. In these interpretations, Osrine was blameless, a victim rather than a willing participant, and the full weight of guilt rested on Mėnuo alone. The folk songs and dainas that preserve this story often used euphemistic or poetic language rather than explicit descriptions, reflecting both the sacred nature of the material and cultural norms about appropriate storytelling. The betrayal might be described as Mėnuo going with Osrine or falling in love with her, or being unfaithful with her, rather than using more graphic terminology. This poetic indirection allowed the story to be told in mixed company and passed down through generations while still conveying the essential facts of what occurred. What all versions made absolutely clear was that Perkunas, the thunder god, became aware of the transgression. As the enforcer of cosmic law and the guarantor of the marriage vows spoken in his presence, Perkunas had both the authority and the responsibility to intervene when divine law was violated. His role as witness at the wedding meant that he had heard Mėnuo's promises, had stood as surety for their fulfillment, and was therefore obligated to respond when those promises were broken. The discovery of the betrayal may have occurred in various ways. Perhaps Perkunas directly observed the transgression, his divine omniscience allowing him to see what was happening in the pre-dawn sky despite Saul's absence. Perhaps other celestial beings witnessed the betrayal and reported it to him, bringing evidence of Mėnuo's faithlessness to the attention of the cosmic enforcer. Perhaps Saul herself eventually discovered what had occurred and appealed to Perkunas for justice, calling upon the thunder god to fulfill his role as guarantor of her marriage and punish the one who had violated his sacred vows. The moment when the betrayal became known to the broader divine community must have been one of shock and horror. The sacred marriage that was supposed to bring harmony to the heavens had instead been corrupted by infidelity and incest. The moon god, who should have been the faithful husband and appropriate stepfather, had proven himself unworthy of trust and incapable of maintaining proper relationships. The morning star, whether victim or accomplice, had been drawn into a scandal that tainted her purity and compromised her role as herald of the dawn. For Saul, the discovery of her husband's betrayal represented not merely personal pain but cosmic catastrophe. She had entered this marriage with trust and commitment, had welcomed Mėnuo as her partner, had expected him to honor his vows and maintain appropriate relationships with her daughter. To discover that he had violated both his promises to her and the proper boundaries with Osrine must have been devastating. The sun goddess's anguish was not simply a private emotion but a cosmic force, her pain radiating outward to affect the entire universe. The betrayal threatened the fundamental order of the cosmos. If the marriage of sun and moon could not be maintained, if these two great luminaries could not coordinate their movements in harmony, then the regular progression of day and night might be disrupted. If family relationships among the celestial gods could be corrupted by incest and infidelity, then the social order on earth that mirrored and derived from divine relationships would be undermined. If sacred vows could be broken without consequence, then no promise would have meaning and no trust could be maintained. This is why immediate intervention was necessary. The betrayal could not be allowed to stand unaddressed, could not be simply forgiven and forgotten without consequences. The cosmic order required that transgression be punished, that violated laws be enforced, that the proper structure of relationships be restored or, if restoration was impossible, that new arrangements be established that would prevent further chaos. The task of providing this intervention, of punishing the transgressor and re-establishing order, fell to Perkunas, the thunder god, whose thunderbolts would soon flash through the heavens in the most dramatic act of divine justice in Baltic mythology. The betrayal of Mėnuo thus stands as the central crisis of this myth, the moment when cosmic harmony shattered and divine intervention became necessary. It represented the failure of the moon god's character, the inadequacy of his changeable nature to sustain the permanent commitments required by sacred marriage. It demonstrated that even among gods, even in the ordered realm of heaven, transgression was possible and had to be addressed. And it established the pattern that would govern the relationship between sun and moon for all eternity, transforming a failed marriage into a perpetual separation that would structure the movements of the celestial lights forever after. Perkunas the Thunderer, guardian of law. To understand the response to Mėnuo's betrayal, we must know more intimately the god who would deliver divine punishment and restore cosmic order. Perkunas was not merely a storm deity or weather god but the very embodiment of divine justice, the enforcer of cosmic law, the guardian who ensured that the proper order of the universe was maintained even when individual gods or humans sought to violate it. His role in the drama of Saulė and Mėnuo was central and essential, for without his intervention, the betrayal would have gone unpunished and the cosmos would have descended into chaos. The name Perkunas derives from ancient Indo-European roots related to striking, hitting, and thunder, connecting him to a long lineage of thunder gods across related cultures. The Lithuanian Perkunas corresponds to the Latvian Perkins, the Prussian Perkins, and is cognate with similar thunder deities in other Indo-European mythologies, the Slavic Purin, the Norse Thor, the Roman Jupiter, and others. This widespread pattern of thunder gods across Indo-European cultures suggests that Perkunas represented a very ancient divine archetype, a fundamental religious concept that reached back to the earliest periods of Indo-European civilization. Perkunas was typically described as a vigorous, powerful man in the prime of life, neither young nor old but at the peak of masculine strength and authority. His beard was copper-colored or black, his face ruddy and strong, his build muscular and imposing. He radiated power and competence, appearing as one who could enforce his will through physical strength as well as divine authority. His very presence commanded respect and inspired both reverence and fear in those who beheld him. The primary weapon of Perkunas was his axe, though he was also sometimes described as wielding arrows or hammer-like implements. These weapons were not merely physical objects but divine tools imbued with cosmic power. When Perkunas struck with his axe, he was not simply hitting things but enforcing divine law, correcting violations of cosmic order, punishing transgression. His axe blows manifested as lightning strikes, brilliant flashes of light accompanied by deafening thunder as the weapon cleaved through the air and struck its target. The god traveled across the sky in a chariot or on horseback, creating the sound of thunder with the rumbling of his vehicle or the hoofbeats of his mount. Different traditions described this conveyance differently. Some accounts spoke of a two-wheeled chariot pulled by goats, similar to the Norse god Thor's chariot. Others described horses pulling the thunderous vehicle, their hooves striking the clouds and producing the rolling booms that humans heard as thunder. Still others portrayed Perkunas as riding a single powerful horse, perhaps fiery or supernatural in nature, that galloped across the heavens in pursuit of wrongdoers or demons. The dwelling place of Perkunas was associated with mountains, hilltops, and high places where heaven and earth met. He resided in a castle or palace made of stones, and when he moved about in this celestial residence, the stones would roll and crash against each other, producing the rumbling sound of thunder. This image of the thunder god's home as a place of tumbling boulders perfectly captured the acoustic nature of thunder, which often sounds like heavy objects rolling and crashing together. Sacred mountains were understood as being especially close to Perkunas's domain, places where his presence was particularly strong and where worship of him was especially appropriate. The oak tree was sacred to Perkunas above all other plants and natural features. This association came from the observation that oak trees, being tall and often standing alone in fields or clearings, were frequently struck by lightning. Rather than seeing this as random chance, Baltic peoples understood it as evidence that Perkunas favored oaks, that he descended to earth along these trees, that they served as conduits for his power. Sacred oak groves became temples of the thunder god, places where worship was conducted and where his presence could be felt most strongly. Under these sacred oaks, eternal flames were maintained in Perkunas's honor. Priests and priestesses tended these fires, ensuring they never went out, for the extinction of the sacred flame would be a terrible omen suggesting that the thunder god's favor had been lost. The fire represented Perkunas's power, the lightning and celestial fire that he wielded, and maintaining it was an act of devotion and a means of ensuring his continued protection and blessing. The historical record preserves accounts of these sacred fires burning in Baltic lands long after official Christianization, with some flames reportedly maintained until the late 18th or even early 19th centuries in remote areas. Perkunas governed multiple domains beyond thunder and lightning. He was a fertility god, his spring lightning and rain being essential for agricultural success. When the first thunder of spring was heard, this was understood as Perkuna's awakening from winter dormancy and engaging once more with the earth, fertilizing it with his storm so that crops could grow. Farmers would pray to him for rain during droughts, making offerings of black animals and pouring beer into fires as libation, asking the thunder god to open the heavens and send the life-giving water their fields required. But he was also a god of war and conflict, his thunderbolts being weapons used not only against cosmic transgressors but also to aid favored warriors in battle. Lithuanian and Latvian warriors would invoke Perkunas before combat, asking for his strength and protection, seeking to channel his warrior energy into their own fighting prowess. The god embodied the aggressive, forceful aspects of masculinity, the capacity for violence in service of just causes, the willingness to use power to enforce right order. This combination of fertility god and warrior god might seem contradictory, but in Indo-European tradition, these roles were closely connected. The same divine force that brought life-giving rain also defended against threats, that fertilized the earth also struck down enemies, that promoted growth also enforced boundaries. Perkunas embodied this dual nature perfectly, being both creator and destroyer, nurturer and punisher, life-giver and death-dealer depending on the circumstances and the needs of cosmic order. The relationship between Perkunas and Zemina, the earth goddess, formed one of the central partnerships in Baltic mythology. As mentioned earlier, Perkunas was often described as Zemina's husband, forming the classic sky father and earth mother pairing found in many Indo-European mythologies. Their sacred marriage, renewed each spring when the thunder awakened and rain fell upon the earth, was essential to fertility and agricultural prosperity. The union of storm and earth, of rain and soil, produced the conditions necessary for crops to grow and life to flourish. This meant that Perkunas had a direct stake in the drama between Saul and Mėnuo, for Zemina was the daughter of this cosmic couple. As Zemina's husband, Perkunas was connected by marriage to both the sun goddess and the moon god. When Mėnuo betrayed Saul, this was not merely a violation of marriage vows between two other deities but an assault on the family structure to which Perkunas himself belonged. The betrayal affected his wife, compromised his daughter-in-law, and disrupted the cosmic relationships upon which the proper ordering of heaven and earth depended. Beyond this personal connection, Perkunas had a professional obligation to respond to Mėnuo's transgression. As the enforcer of divine law, the god whose very nature involved maintaining cosmic order, Perkunas could not allow such a serious violation to go unpunished. He had stood witness at the wedding of Saul and Mėnuo, had heard the vows exchanged, had served as guarantor that those promises would be kept. When Mėnuo broke his vows, this was not merely personal betrayal but a violation of commitments made before the cosmic enforcer himself, an act of contempt toward divine authority that demanded immediate response. The role of Perkunas as divine judge and executioner was well established in Baltic tradition. He was the one who struck down evildoers with his thunderbolts, who punished demons and malevolent spirits, who enforced the laws that governed both divine and human behavior. When someone committed serious crimes, particularly violations of sacred oaths or attacks on divine order, it was Perkunas who delivered punishment. His thunderbolts were the instruments of cosmic justice, and being struck by lightning was understood as receiving divine punishment for wrongdoing. This created a complex dynamic in the cosmic drama about to unfold. Perkunas was not merely an outside arbiter called in to resolve a dispute between other gods. He was personally connected to the situation through his marriage to Zemina, professionally obligated to respond through his role as enforcer of divine law, and specifically committed to intervention through his presence as witness at the wedding. The combination of personal stake, professional duty, and specific obligation made his involvement not merely appropriate but absolutely necessary. The thunder god's character was marked by a strong sense of justice and propriety. He was not capricious or arbitrary in his punishments but responded to genuine violations of divine law. He protected the innocent and struck down the guilty. He defended proper order against chaos and transgression. This made him both feared and respected throughout the cosmos. Those who kept the laws, who honored their oaths, who maintained proper relationships, had nothing to fear from Perkunas. But those who violated divine order, who broke sacred vows, who corrupted proper hierarchies and boundaries, knew that his thunderbolts would eventually find them. Folk tradition preserved numerous stories about Perkunas pursuing and punishing various malefactors. He chased demons across the sky, striking at them with his thunderbolts as they tried to hide behind trees, inside buildings, or in other refuges. He punished humans who committed particularly heinous crimes, with lightning strikes understood as divine judgment on evildoers. He enforced proper agricultural practices, proper worship, proper social relationships, using his power to maintain the order that allowed civilization to function and prosper. The thunder god was also associated with purification and cleansing. His lightning could purify corrupted spaces, his rain could wash away impurities, his fire could burn away pollution and evil. This purifying aspect would become relevant in the response to Mėnuo's betrayal, for what the moon god had done corrupted not just individual relationships but the very structure of the cosmos. Restoring order would require not merely punishment but cosmic cleansing, a purification of the heavens that would remove the taint of transgression and re-establish proper boundaries and relationships. Perkunas's relationship with fire was particularly significant. As a lightning god, he wielded celestial fire, striking from the sky with burning bolts that could ignite whatever they touched. The eternal flames maintained in his honor under sacred oaks represented earthly manifestations of his divine fire, brought down from heaven and sustained through human devotion. Fire was understood as inherently purifying, destructive of corruption and evil, transformative in its power to reduce complex matter to simple ash. The thunder god's mastery of fire made him capable of burning away what could not be reformed, destroying what could not be redeemed. Yet Perkunas was not merely a god of destruction and punishment. He was also a protector and defender, one who used his power to safeguard the innocent and maintain the conditions necessary for life to flourish. His spring thunder broke winter's grip and allowed the growing season to begin. His rain fed crops and filled streams and rivers. His lightning struck down demons and evil spirits that threatened humans. His enforcement of divine law created the stable, predictable social order that allowed communities to function and prosper. Without Perkunas maintaining cosmic order through his vigilant enforcement, chaos would overwhelm the world and life would become impossible. This balance between destroyer and protector, between punisher and guardian, defined Perkunas's essential nature. He was not sadistic or cruel, did not punish for the sake of punishment or destroy for the sake of destruction. Rather, he used his terrible power in service of cosmic order, wielding his thunderbolts to maintain the proper structure of relationships and laws that made civilized existence possible. When he punished Mėnuo for betraying Saul, this would not be arbitrary violence but necessary correction, the restoration of proper order after it had been violated. The thunder god now stood at the center of the cosmic drama, aware of the betrayal that had occurred, obligated by duty and personal connection to respond, armed with the power necessary to deliver punishment and restore order. His thunderbolts were ready, his chariot prepared for pursuit, his divine authority unquestioned. What remained was for him to act, to pursue the transgressor, to deliver the judgment that would echo through all of time, and to establish the new cosmic order that would govern the relationship between sun and moon for all eternity. The stage was set for the most dramatic act of divine justice in Baltic mythology, and Perkunas the Thunderer would be its primary agent and executor. The punishment, multiple versions. When Perkunas discovered or was informed of Mėnuo's betrayal of Saul, his response was immediate, decisive, and terrible. The thunder god could not allow such a serious violation of cosmic order to stand unpunished. He had witnessed the marriage vows, stood as guarantor of their fulfillment, and was personally connected to the situation through his wife Xemena. The moon god's transgression demanded punishment, and Perkunas was both authorized and obligated to deliver it. What followed was one of the most dramatic moments in Baltic mythology, an act of divine justice that would permanently alter the cosmic order and establish forever the relationship between sun and moon. The punishment of Mėnuo took different forms in different regional traditions and folk song variants, though all versions agreed on the fundamental fact that Perkunas struck the moon god for his betrayal. These variations do not contradict each other so much as emphasize different aspects of the punishment or reflect different communities' understanding of how divine justice operated. Let us explore the major versions of Mėnuo's punishment, understanding that each contributed to the overall meaning of the myth. The most dramatic and visually striking version of the punishment described Perkunas actually splitting Mėnuo in two with his sword or axe. The thunder god, in his fury at the betrayal and his determination to punish the transgressor, pursued Mėnuo across the sky. When he caught up with the moon god, Perkunas struck with such force that he literally cleaved Mėnuo in half, cutting the moon into two separate pieces. This act of divine violence was so powerful that it affected not merely Mėnuo's divine person but his physical manifestation in the sky. The moon itself was split, its fullness divided into two crescent halves. But this punishment was not permanent in the sense of destroying Mėnuo completely. Instead, the moon god was condemned to undergo this splitting repeatedly, eternally. Each month, as the moon waxed toward fullness, Mėnuo would begin to recover his strength and wholeness. He would grow from new moon to crescent to half to gibbous to finally achieve full moon, restored to complete form. But this restoration was temporary and illusory. As soon as the moon reached fullness, Perkunas would strike again, splitting Mėnuo once more and beginning the cycle anew. This version of the punishment explained the monthly lunar cycle in mythological terms. The waxing moon represented Mėnuo gradually recovering from Perkunas's blow, slowly healing and regaining his full form. The full moon was the moment of complete restoration, the brief period when the moon god had achieved wholeness again. But then the waning moon represented Perkunas's punishment being delivered once more, the moon god being split and diminished, reduced from fullness to half to crescent to nothing, disappearing completely during the new moon before beginning the cycle again. This interpretation made the phases of the moon a perpetual reminder of divine justice and the consequences of transgression. Every time people looked up and saw the moon in any phase other than full, they were witnessing the ongoing punishment of Mėnuo for his betrayal of Saul. The moon's changing shape was not merely a natural phenomenon but a cosmic morality play, enacted month after month for all to see, demonstrating that even gods could not violate divine law without suffering consequences. The cyclical nature of this punishment was significant. Mėnuo was not destroyed or permanently damaged but was condemned to undergo punishment repeatedly, eternally, without hope of final resolution or forgiveness. This perpetual cycle reflected his crime. As a changeable being who violated his permanent marriage vows, he was punished by being forced into an eternal cycle of change, never allowed to remain in any single state, constantly moving from wholeness to splitting and back again. A second major version of the punishment focused on Perkunas disfiguring Mėnuo's face rather than splitting him in two. In this interpretation, the thunder god struck the moon god with such force that he permanently scarred or disfigured his face. The blow from Perkunas's axe or the strike of his thunderbolt left marks on Mėnuo that could never be fully healed, wounds that would remain visible for all eternity as evidence of his transgression and punishment. This version found its explanation in the observable features of the moon's surface. When humans looked up at the full moon, they could see darker patches and lighter areas, patterns and markings that created the appearance of a face or figure. Different cultures have interpreted these markings differently. Some see a man in the moon, others a rabbit, still others various different images. In Baltic tradition, these markings were understood as the scars left by Perkunas's punishment of Mėnuo, permanent damage inflicted by the thunder god's righteous fury. The folk songs described these marks in various ways. Some spoke of Perkunas striking Mėnuo's face, leaving visible wounds and scars. Others described the moon god's face as being slashed or cut by the thunder god's weapon. Still others suggested that the marks were burns from lightning strikes, scorched areas where Perkunas's celestial fire had seared the moon god's flesh. Regardless of the exact mechanism, the result was the same. Mėnuo bore visible evidence of his punishment, marks that anyone could see when they looked at the full moon. This version of the punishment emphasized permanence over cyclical repetition. Unlike the splitting interpretation where the damage was repaired each month only to be inflicted again, the disfigurement interpretation suggested that Mėnuo carried permanent scars from his transgression. Every full moon displayed these marks, reminding all who saw them of what happened when divine law was violated. The moon god could never escape or hide from his crime, for the evidence was written on his face for all eternity. The disfigurement also served as a mark of shame. In cultures that valued physical beauty and wholeness, particularly among divine beings who were expected to embody perfection, bearing visible scars and wounds marked one as damaged, diminished, less than fully worthy. Mėnuo, who had once been handsome and whole, was now permanently disfigured, his appearance a constant reminder of his moral failure. He could no longer claim the respect and honor due to an unblemished God but carried the visible evidence of his transgression wherever he went. A third major version of the punishment focused not on physical damage to Mėnuo but on the restructuring of his relationship with Saul. In this interpretation, Perkunas decreed a divorce between the sun goddess and the moon god, permanently ending their marriage and separating their celestial paths. Where once sun and moon were supposed to travel together in coordinated harmony, now they were condemned to remain apart, their courses across the sky arranged so that they would never or rarely share the heavens at the same time. This version explained why the sun rules the day while the moon governs the night. Before the betrayal and divorce, there may have been more overlap in their appearances, more times when both were visible simultaneously. After Perkunas's judgment, their schedules were permanently separated. The sun would have the day, rising in the morning and setting in the evening, commanding the sky during daylight hours. The moon would have the night, appearing after sunset and sometimes remaining visible until morning, but generally avoiding the times when the sun was present. The folk songs described this arrangement in domestic terms that made it accessible and understandable to common people. Saul and Mėnuo were divorced. Their marriage ended by divine decree due to the moon god's infidelity. But like many divorced couples with children, they still had to coordinate regarding their shared daughter Zemina, the earth. Both parents wanted to see their daughter, both wished to maintain relationship with her, and so they had to work out an arrangement that allowed each to spend time with Zemina. The solution was a custody arrangement of sorts, though not in the formal legal sense. Saul would visit Zemina during the day, shining down upon the earth, warming and illuminating her daughter, watching over her during daylight hours. Mėnuo would visit at night, when Saul was absent, providing his cooler light to the earth during the hours of darkness. They coordinated their schedules to avoid encountering each other, for to meet would risk renewed conflict and require Perkunas to intervene once again. This version of the punishment resonated deeply with human experience. Divorce, the breaking of marriage bonds, the need to coordinate parenting while maintaining separation from a former spouse, these were realities that many people understood from personal experience or observation. By framing the cosmic separation of sun and moon in these domestic terms, the myth became immediately relatable and emotionally resonant. The gods experienced broken relationships and family complications just as humans did, making divine stories relevant to human life. The permanent separation also explained eclipses, those rare moments when sun and moon did appear together in the sky. Solar eclipses, when the moon passes in front of the sun, could be understood as Mėnuo attempting to approach his former wife, trying to reunite or perhaps trying to see her despite the prohibition against such meetings. The sun's light being temporarily blocked by the moon was Saul being overwhelmed or covered by her former husband's unexpected appearance. Lunar eclipses, when the earth's shadow falls on the moon, might be interpreted differently. Perhaps this was Saul using her daughter Zemina to block Mėnuo, interposing the earth between herself and the moon god to prevent any possibility of contact. Or perhaps it represented Perkunas's continued enforcement of the separation, the thunder god casting his shadow over the moon to remind Mėnuo of the boundaries that must be maintained. The anxiety and fear that often accompanied eclipses in ancient cultures made sense in this mythological context. These were moments when the cosmic order established after Mėnuo's punishment was temporarily disrupted, when the sun and moon came into contact despite their mandated separation. Such moments were dangerous, unpredictable, potentially disastrous. People would make noise, perform rituals, offer prayers, all designed to end the eclipse and restore proper separation, ensuring that Saul and Mėnuo returned to their appointed courses and maintained the cosmic order that Perkunas had established. Some folk traditions combined elements from different punishment versions, suggesting that Mėnuo suffered multiple consequences for his transgression. He might be both split monthly by Perkunas's strikes and permanently scarred by the initial punishment. He might be divorced from Saul and also physically damaged by the thunder god's weapons. These combinations emphasize the severity of his crime and the comprehensiveness of divine justice, ensuring that punishment came in multiple forms and from multiple directions. Regardless of which version or combination of versions a particular community emphasized, certain elements remained constant across all interpretations. First, Perkunas was the agent of punishment, the divine enforcer whose thunderbolts delivered justice and restored cosmic order. Second, the punishment was severe and lasting, not a minor reprimand but a fundamental alteration of Mėnuo's existence and status. Third, the evidence of the punishment remained visible in the sky, observable by all who looked up at the moon, making divine justice a public spectacle rather than a private matter. Fourth, the punishment established a new cosmic order that would govern the relationship between sun and moon for all eternity. The betrayal could not be undone, the marriage could not be restored, but proper boundaries could be re-established and enforced. The sun and moon would continue their appointed courses, but now separated, kept apart by divine decree, their movements coordinated not through the harmony of marriage but through the enforced discipline of divine judgment. The punishment also served pedagogical functions, teaching important lessons to both divine and human audiences. For the gods, it demonstrated that even celestial beings were subject to divine law, that sacred vows must be honored, that transgression would be punished regardless of the offender's status or power. No one was above cosmic law, not even the moon god himself. This established the principle that justice applied universally, that rules bound everyone equally, and that violations would bring consequences. For humans, the punishment provided multiple lessons. It taught the sanctity of marriage vows and the seriousness of infidelity. It demonstrated that beauty could be dangerous and that forbidden desires must be resisted. It showed that punishment for transgression was certain and severe, that divine justice operated even when human justice might fail. And it provided an explanation for observable astronomical phenomena, making the natural world meaningful and comprehensible by linking it to moral and spiritual truths. The monthly repetition of the lunar cycle, whether understood as repeated splitting or as the ongoing visibility of permanent scars, created a cosmic calendar of divine justice. Every month, the drama of Mėnuo's punishment was reenacted in the sky. Every month, people were reminded of the consequences of violating divine law. Every month, the waxing and waning of the moon told the story of betrayal, punishment, and the eternal enforcement of cosmic order. The punishment also affected Osrine, though her consequences were less dramatically visible than Mėnuo's. The morning star continued to rise each day, continued to herald the coming dawn, but her role was now shadowed by the scandal in which she had been involved. Whether victim or accomplice, whether innocent or guilty, she was marked by association with the cosmic catastrophe. Her beauty, which should have been celebrated, was now complicated by its connection to the betrayal. Her service to her mother Saul was now performed under the shadow of what had occurred between her and Mėnuo. Some folk traditions suggested that Osrine bore her own punishment, though it was less severe than Mėnuo's. She might be condemned to eternal service, forever rising before dawn to prepare for her mother's arrival, never able to rest or vary her routine. Or she might be separated from other celestial beings, isolated by the scandal, forced to perform her duties alone without the companionship and fellowship she had previously enjoyed. These subtler punishments reflected the ambiguity about her guilt and the question of how much responsibility she bore for what had occurred. For Saul, the aftermath of the betrayal and punishment was complex. She had been wronged by her husband, betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. But she had also seen divine justice delivered, had witnessed Perkunas enforce the vows that Mėnuo had violated, had observed the moon god receiving the punishment his transgression required. This may have provided some satisfaction, some sense that cosmic order had been restored and that her suffering had been acknowledged and addressed. Yet the sun goddess also bore ongoing consequences. Her marriage was ended, her trust betrayed, her family structure disrupted. She would continue her daily journey across the sky, but now as a divorced goddess rather than a married one, separated from the partner who should have traveled in coordination with her. She would see her daughter Osrine each morning and evening, but that relationship was now complicated by whatever had occurred between Osrine and Mėnuo. And she would coordinate with her former husband regarding their mutual daughter Ximena, maintaining the minimal contact necessary for parenting while avoiding any deeper engagement. The punishment of Mėnuo thus represented not a simple, isolated event but a complex restructuring of cosmic relationships that affected multiple divine beings and established new patterns of interaction that would govern the heavens forever after. The thunder god's intervention was necessary and just, but it could not return things to how they were before the betrayal. Instead, it created a new cosmic order, a different arrangement that acknowledged both the reality of what had occurred and the necessity of preventing further transgression. Perkunas himself was changed by these events, or at least his role was clarified and emphasized. He was confirmed as the eternal enforcer of cosmic law, the vigilant guardian who would continue to watch the heavens and ensure that proper boundaries were maintained. His thunderbolts remained ready to strike down any who violated divine order, and his specific attention to the relationship between sun and moon meant that any attempt by Mėnuo to approach Saul inappropriately would be immediately met with renewed punishment. The punishment versions, in their variety and their common themes, provided a rich mythological framework for understanding both astronomical phenomena and moral truths. The monthly cycle of the moon became a perpetual morality play. The markings on the lunar surface became evidence of divine justice. The separation of day and night became a cosmic divorce proceeding. And the rare moments of eclipse became dangerous encounters between separated parties, requiring divine intervention and human ritual to resolve safely. Through the punishment of Mėnuo, Baltic mythology established one of its central principles: that cosmic order depended on proper relationships being maintained, that violations of divine law would be punished severely and publicly, and that the evidence of divine justice would remain visible in the natural world as a constant reminder to all who observed it. The moon, changing its shape each month or bearing permanent scars or traveling separately from the sun, became a living testament to the consequences of betrayal and the certainty of divine justice. The aftermath, a cosmos transformed. The punishment delivered by Perkunas fundamentally and permanently transformed the structure of the cosmos. What had been intended as a cosmic marriage that would bring harmony and coordination to the heavens instead became the catalyst for a complete reorganization of celestial relationships and movements. The aftermath of Mėnuo's betrayal and subsequent punishment established the cosmic order that humans would observe for all time, an order based not on marital harmony but on enforced separation, not on trust and cooperation but on vigilant oversight and threatened punishment. The most immediate and observable consequence was the separation of the sun's and moon's paths across the sky. Before the betrayal, there may have been expectations that Saul and Mėnuo would coordinate their movements more closely, perhaps traveling together or at least frequently sharing the sky as they moved through their respective courses. After the punishment and divorce, their paths were deliberately separated. The sun came to rule the day exclusively, rising in the morning, traveling across the sky during daylight hours and setting in the evening. The moon governed the night, appearing after the sun had set and generally remaining visible only during hours of darkness. This separation meant that Saul and Mėnuo rarely saw each other. During most days and nights, only one of them was visible in the sky, while the other was below the horizon, either resting or traveling through the underworld regions beneath the earth. This arrangement served multiple purposes. It prevented direct confrontation between the divorced couple, eliminating opportunities for renewed conflict. It established clear boundaries and responsibilities, with each luminary having undisputed authority during their respective time periods. And it created a regular, predictable pattern of day and night that structured all of earthly existence. The coordination regarding Zemina, their daughter the Earth Goddess, became a central organizing principle of the new cosmic order. Both Saul and Mėnuo loved Zemina and wished to maintain relationship with her. Both wanted to visit their daughter, to watch over her, to provide their particular blessings to the earth. But because they could not be in each other's presence without risking renewed conflict, they had to arrange their visits to Zemina so that they occurred at different times. Saul's daily visits to Zemina brought warmth, light, and life to the earth. The sun goddess's presence during daylight hours allowed plants to grow through photosynthesis, warmed the air and ground, drove away darkness and evil spirits, and made it possible for humans and animals to see and go about their activities. Her maternal care for Zemina was expressed through these practical benefits, the tangible blessings that flowed from the sun's light and heat. Each day was Saul's time with her daughter, her opportunity to nurture and sustain the earth. Mėnuo's nightly visits provided different but complementary benefits. The moon god's cooler light did not have the life-giving intensity of the sun, but it illuminated the darkness and made nighttime activities possible. His phases provided a calendar for agricultural activities, his influence affected tides and perhaps other natural rhythms, and his presence offered protection during the vulnerable hours of darkness when evil forces might otherwise roam freely. Each night was Mėnuo's time with Zemina, his chance to maintain relationship with his daughter despite his disgrace. This alternating custody arrangement meant that day and night, solar and lunar influence, warm light and cool light, all alternated in regular succession. The earth received the benefits of both parents despite their separation. Zemina was not deprived of either father or mother but enjoyed the presence of each in turn, experiencing the full range of celestial influences necessary for the flourishing of life. The broken marriage did not break the parental bonds, and the punishment of Mėnuo did not prevent him from continuing to serve important cosmic functions. However, the new arrangement was not without tensions and complications. There were times, particularly around the transitions between day and night, when the scheduling became delicate. During twilight hours, both sun and moon might be visible simultaneously, one rising while the other was setting, creating brief moments when the separated couple shared the sky. These transitional times were understood to be uncomfortable for both deities, moments when they were forced into proximity despite their mutual desire to avoid each other. The morning hours when Mėnuo was setting in the west while Saul was preparing to rise in the east were particularly fraught. This was when Osrine, the morning star, appeared to herald the sun's arrival, and her presence inevitably reminded all involved of the betrayal that had caused this entire catastrophe. Mėnuo would see Osrine as he was departing, perhaps feeling renewed longing or guilt or resentment. Saul would see both her former husband and her daughter during these morning moments, perhaps experiencing pain at the reminder of what had occurred. Osrine herself had to perform her duties while aware that her very presence caused discomfort and reminded everyone of the scandal. The phases of the moon added another layer of complexity to the new cosmic order. When the moon was full and rose at sunset just as the sun was setting, the two luminaries would be positioned on opposite horizons, as far apart as possible while both being visible. This maximum separation seemed to reflect their divorced status, each occupying opposite ends of the sky, facing away from each other, maintaining the greatest possible distance. During new moon, when the lunar disk was invisible, Mėnuo was traveling close to the sun's position during the day, hidden by her superior brightness, perhaps feeling diminished and overwhelmed by his former wife's greater power. The waxing and waning cycle, whether understood as repeated punishment by Perkunas or as some other cosmic mechanism, added an element of change and instability to Mėnuo's existence that contrasted sharply with Saulė's constancy. The sun goddess rose and set with regular reliability, her brightness never varying significantly, her schedule predictable and dependable. The moon god underwent constant transformation, his shape and size changing throughout each month, his rising and setting time shifting, his position relative to the sun and stars constantly adjusting. This reflected his changeable nature, the fundamental instability that had made him unsuited to permanent marriage and that continued to characterize his existence after the divorce. Eclipses, as mentioned earlier, became moments of cosmic anxiety and danger in the new order. These rare events when sun and moon came into direct alignment, when their separation was temporarily breached, were understood as violations of the proper cosmic arrangement. Solar eclipses, with the moon blocking the sun's light, might represent Mėnuo attempting to approach or interfere with Saul, forcing his presence upon her against the terms of their separation. Lunar eclipses, with the Earth's shadow falling on the moon, might be Saul or Zemina or Perkunas intervening to restrain Mėnuo and maintain proper boundaries. The fear and ritual response that eclipses provoked in Baltic communities reflected this understanding of them as cosmic emergencies. People would make noise by banging pots, ringing bells, or shouting, attempting to drive away whatever force was causing the unnatural conjunction of sun and moon. Prayers would be offered to Perkunas, asking the thunder god to enforce the proper separation and restore normal order. Offerings might be made to Saul, supporting the sun goddess in her struggle against her former husband's encroachment. These human responses to eclipses participated in the cosmic drama, helping to restore proper order when it was temporarily disrupted. The new cosmic order also affected the stars and other celestial beings. The daughters of Saul, particularly Osrine and Vakarine, continued their appointed duties but did so within the context of the post-betrayal cosmos. Their service to their mother was now shadowed by knowledge of what had occurred. Their positions as morning and evening star took on new significance, marking the boundaries between day and night, the transitions when custody of Zemina shifted from one parent to the other. Other planetary goddesses, the various celestial daughters associated with Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Mercury, continued their courses through the night sky but did so with awareness that the family structure had been fundamentally altered. They were daughters of divorced parents, children of a cosmic catastrophe, and their movements through the heavens occurred within this new framework. Their relationships with both father and mother had to be renegotiated in light of what had happened. The broader pantheon of Baltic deities was also affected by the transformation of the cosmic order. Dievas, the supreme sky father, may have withdrawn even further from active involvement in cosmic affairs after witnessing this catastrophe, confirming his status as a deus osiosus who left day-to-day governance to other gods. Perkunas's authority and importance were reinforced and elevated, his role as enforcer and guardian proven essential to maintaining any kind of order. Zemina found herself in the complicated position of being daughter to both parties in a divine divorce, maintaining relationship with both while navigating the tensions and difficulties their separation created. For humanity, the transformed cosmos provided both challenges and opportunities. The regular alternation of day and night, solar and lunar influence, became the fundamental rhythm structuring human life. People organized their activities around this cycle, working during the day when Saulė's light made labor possible, resting at night under Mėnuo's cooler illumination. Agricultural practices were timed according to both solar seasons and lunar phases, taking advantage of the complementary influences of both celestial parents on the earth. The myth itself, enacted perpetually in the sky through the movements and appearances of sun and moon, provided ongoing moral instruction. Children grew up learning the story of Saul and Mėnuo, understanding the consequences of betrayal, the importance of keeping vows, the certainty of divine justice. The monthly lunar cycle served as a perpetual reminder of these lessons, making moral education visible and accessible to all who looked up at the night sky. The separation of day and night, the divorce of sun and moon, also created a dualistic structure in Baltic cosmology that balanced opposite principles. Day and night, light and darkness, warmth and coolness, solar and lunar, masculine and feminine, all these oppositions were held in dynamic tension through the enforced separation of the two great luminaries. Rather than being synthesized in harmonious unity through successful marriage, these opposites were kept distinct and separate, each having its own time and space, each exerting its influence without interference from the other. This dualistic structure may have reflected broader patterns in Baltic religion and society, where various oppositions were recognized and respected rather than resolved. Sacred and profane, divine and human, wild and cultivated, male and female, all these oppositions found cosmic expression in the separated courses of sun and moon. The transformation of the cosmos following Mėnuo's betrayal thus established fundamental patterns that extended far beyond astronomical phenomena to structure religious thought and social organization. The aftermath also created an atmosphere of ongoing tension and vigilance. Perkunas could not relax his oversight but had to maintain constant attention to ensure that the separated sun and moon did not violate the terms of their divorce. Saul had to guard against any attempt by Mėnuo to approach her inappropriately. Mėnuo had to control whatever lingering desires or impulses he felt, knowing that any transgression would bring renewed punishment from the thunder god. The celestial daughters had to navigate carefully between their parents, maintaining relationship with both while respecting the boundaries that now governed their family structure. This ongoing tension meant that cosmic order was not a fixed, static condition but required active maintenance and enforcement. The universe was not a perfect mechanism that, once set in motion, would continue functioning automatically forever. Rather, it was a system that required vigilant oversight, constant adjustment, and readiness to intervene when problems arose. Perkunas's thunderbolts remained necessary precisely because the potential for disorder and transgression never completely disappeared. The transformed cosmos was thus a cosmos of separation, boundaries, and enforcement rather than harmony, unity, and cooperation. It was an order maintained by external discipline rather than internal virtue, by fear of punishment rather than mutual commitment. It worked in the sense that day and night continued to alternate regularly, that the sun and moon followed their appointed courses, and that the earth received the celestial influences necessary for life. But it was a diminished order compared to what might have been, a functional arrangement born from catastrophe rather than an ideal structure flowing from divine virtue and wisdom. Yet within this transformed and diminished cosmos, life continued. Humans adapted to the new order, learned its rhythms, and found ways to thrive within its structures. The sun still rose each morning, bringing warmth and light. The moon still waxed and waned each month, marking time and influencing natural cycles. The earth still produced its harvests, nurtured its creatures, and sustained its human population. The cosmic catastrophe had not destroyed the possibility of life but had simply reorganized the conditions under which life occurred, establishing new patterns that would govern existence for all eternity. The continuing dance. Although Saul and Mėnuo were separated by divine decree and prevented from sharing meaningful time together, their cosmic dance did not entirely cease. The movements of sun and moon, structured by their divorce and the punishment Perkunas had delivered, created patterns that continue to evolve and interact across the sky. This ongoing celestial choreography, visible to all who observed the heavens, told the continuing story of their complicated relationship and the eternal consequences of the original betrayal. The most dramatic moments in this continuing dance were the eclipses, those rare occasions when the paths of sun and moon aligned in ways that allowed them to interact directly despite their mandated separation. Solar eclipses represented particularly charged encounters, moments when Mėnuo positioned himself directly between the earth and the sun, blocking Saulė's light and forcing himself into her presence. From the human perspective on earth, these events appeared as the moon's dark disk crossing in front of the sun, temporarily obscuring the solar brilliance and plunging the world into unnatural twilight or darkness. In mythological terms, solar eclipses could be interpreted as Mėnuo attempting to approach his former wife, perhaps driven by lingering desire or longing, perhaps seeking reconciliation or forgiveness, perhaps simply unable to resist the pull toward the one from whom he had been separated. The blocking of the sun's light might represent Saul being overwhelmed by this unwanted approach, her radiance temporarily suppressed by the moon god's presence, her ability to shine freely interrupted by his interference. The ancient Balts responded to solar eclipses with fear and ritual action. The darkening of the sun during daytime hours was deeply disturbing, suggesting that cosmic order had broken down and that the proper separation of celestial bodies was being violated. People would make noise to drive away whatever forces were causing this unnatural conjunction. They would bang pots and pans, ring bells, shout and create commotion, all designed to interrupt the eclipse and restore normal conditions. Prayers would be offered to Perkunas, calling upon the thunder god to enforce the separation that Mėnuo was violating, to strike down the moon god once more and drive him away from Saul. The end of the eclipse, when the moon's shadow moved past the sun and full daylight returned, was understood as the successful restoration of proper order. Perkunas had intervened, Mėnuo had been driven back to his proper position, and Saul could resume her journey across the sky unimpeded. The relief and gratitude people felt at the return of sunlight was not merely about the physical comfort of light and warmth but reflected deeper spiritual concerns about the maintenance of cosmic order and the continued proper functioning of the universe. Lunar eclipses presented a different scenario. During these events, the moon passed through the Earth's shadow, its normally bright surface darkening and sometimes turning reddish or coppery as it moved through the shadowed region. Rather than the moon approaching the sun, this seemed to represent the moon being chastised or punished, perhaps by Perkunas, perhaps by Saul herself, or perhaps through the intervention of Zemina, who positioned herself between her parents to prevent inappropriate contact. The reddish color that the moon sometimes displayed during total lunar eclipses was particularly ominous and significant. This coloration might be understood as evidence of violence, the blood of punishment, or the blush of shame as Mėnuo was once again reminded of his transgression and its consequences. Folk tradition suggested that the red moon was a dangerous or inauspicious sign, a warning that cosmic order was unstable and that humans should be especially vigilant and devout during such times. Beyond the dramatic moments of eclipse, the regular patterns of lunar phases and the moon's relationship to the sun created an ongoing narrative that played out each month. The new moon, when the lunar disk was invisible because it was positioned close to the sun in the sky, might represent Mėnuo being forced into proximity with Saul but hidden by her greater brightness, diminished and overwhelmed by her presence, unable to show his face because of shame or because of the overpowering nature of her radiance. The waxing crescent, first visible in the western sky after sunset, represented Mėnuo beginning to recover and show himself again as he moved away from the sun's position. Each night, as the crescent grew larger and the moon rose later, the moon god was moving further from Saul, gaining independence and visibility as the separation between them increased. This gradual waxing reflected his recovery of strength and confidence as he put distance between himself and his former wife. The first quarter moon, when half the lunar disk was illuminated and the moon was positioned 90 degrees away from the sun in the sky, represented a point of balance and relative stability. Mėnuo had moved far enough from Saul to have significant independence and presence, but he had not yet reached the point of maximum separation and confrontation. This was perhaps the most neutral and least charged moment in the monthly cycle, when the divorce arrangement was functioning smoothly and both parties were maintaining appropriate distance. The waxing gibbous moon, more than half illuminated but not yet full, showed Mėnuo continuing to grow in strength and size, approaching the moment of maximum brightness and power. He was nearing the point of full opposition to Saul, moving toward the configuration where they would be positioned on opposite sides of the earth, as far apart as possible while both remaining above the horizon. This growing strength might be understood as somewhat threatening, as the moon god approaching the peak of his power and potentially becoming bold enough to contemplate inappropriate action. The full moon represented the moment of maximum separation and maximum tension. Rising at sunset just as Saul was setting, positioned on the opposite horizon, the full moon was as far from the sun as possible in earthly terms while both remained visible. This configuration might be understood as the divorced couple forced to see each other across maximum distance, each aware of the other's presence but separated by the full diameter of the earth, unable to approach but unable to completely avoid seeing each other. The brightness of the full moon, reflecting the maximum amount of solar light, might represent Mėnuo at his most powerful and potentially most dangerous, the moment when Perkunas had to be most vigilant to prevent any violation of the mandated separation. After full moon, the waning gibbous phase represented Mėnuo beginning to diminish again as he moved back toward conjunction with the sun. His power and brightness decreased, his rise time moved later into the night, and his period of visibility shortened. This waning might be understood as Perkunas's punishment being delivered once more in the splitting version of the myth, or simply as the natural consequence of the moon god moving back toward proximity with his former wife and being overwhelmed by her approach. The last quarter moon, again showing half the disk illuminated but now in the morning sky rather than evening, represented another point of temporary balance. But this balance was perhaps more precarious than the first quarter. for Mėnuo was now moving back toward dangerous proximity with Saul. His presence in the morning sky meant he would soon encounter Osrine, the morning star, whose appearance would remind all involved of the original transgression and add additional tension to an already fraught situation. The waning crescent, visible in the eastern sky before sunrise, brought Mėnuo into direct proximity with both Osrine and the approaching Saul. These mornings when the old moon hung in the pre-dawn sky were laden with mythological significance. The moon god, diminished and weakened, was in the presence of the two goddesses most directly involved in his crime. Osrine rose to herald the sun, performing her dutiful service to her mother while aware that the moon god who had betrayed both of them was present. Saul prepared to rise, knowing that her former husband and her daughter were both in the sky ahead of her, that she would have to begin her daily journey in awareness of them both. This monthly cycle thus created a perpetually repeated narrative of separation, maximum distance, return, and renewed dangerous proximity. The story of Saul and Mėnuo's broken marriage was told anew each month through the phases of the moon and its changing relationship to the sun. Every month, observers of the sky could watch this cosmic drama unfold, could see the consequences of the original betrayal being worked out in the movements of the celestial lights. Osrine's continuing role in this dance was particularly poignant. Every morning, the morning star rose to perform her service to Saul, announcing the approach of dawn, preparing the way for her mother's journey across the sky. This dutiful service continued regardless of the scandal, regardless of whatever had occurred between Osrine and Mėnuo, regardless of the complications and tensions within the celestial family. The morning star never failed in her obligations, never stopped performing her appointed task, demonstrating a loyalty and commitment to duty that perhaps surpassed her father Mėnuo's capacity for such faithfulness. Yet Osrine's situation remained inherently complicated and somewhat tragic. If she had been a victim of Mėnuo's inappropriate desire or assault, she carried the burden of that victimization while continuing to serve faithfully. If she had been a willing participant in the betrayal, whether through active seduction or simply by failing to resist temptation, she bore the guilt of having participated in cosmic catastrophe. Either way, her exceptional beauty, which should have been an uncomplicated blessing, had become associated with scandal and disruption, making her simultaneously celebrated for her radiance and shadowed by the role she had played in the great betrayal. Valkyrine, the evening star, provided a counterpoint to her morning sister. Appearing in the western sky after sunset, she marked the end of Saul's daily journey and the beginning of the night when Mėnuo would take his turn visiting Zemina. Valkyrine prepared the sun's bed, made ready for her rest, and perhaps served as a guardian or companion during the vulnerable transitional time between day and night. Her service was essential but perhaps less fraught with mythological drama than Osrine's, for she appeared when the moon god was generally not yet visible and did not have to encounter him as directly as Osrine did each morning. The continuing dance between sun and moon also involved Perkunas maintaining his eternal vigilance. The thunder god could not relax his oversight or assume that the punishment he had delivered would be sufficient to permanently prevent further transgression. Mėnuo's changeable nature, his demonstrated inability to maintain proper boundaries, and the ongoing proximity required by their shared daughter Zemina meant that constant supervision was necessary. Perkunas watched the heavens, his thunderbolts ready, prepared to intervene at any moment if the moon god violated the terms of their separation. This vigilance was not merely theoretical but occasionally had to be enacted. When eclipses occurred, when the moon's path brought it too close to the sun, when any configuration suggested potential violation of cosmic order, Perkunas was ready to act. The thunder that often accompanied storms, the lightning that flashed during certain celestial events, might be understood as the thunder god reminding Mėnuo of the consequences of transgression, warning him to maintain proper distance, demonstrating that enforcement of divine law remained active and ready. Folk tradition preserved awareness of this ongoing cosmic drama through careful observation of celestial phenomena and through the continued telling of the story. Each generation learned about Saul and Mėnuo, about the betrayal and punishment, about the transformed cosmos and the eternal dance of separation and potential encounter. This transmission of knowledge meant that when people looked up at the sky, they did not see merely physical objects following mechanical laws but divine persons enacting an eternal story of love, betrayal, justice, and consequences. The emotional resonance of this continuing dance cannot be overstated. Here was a story that involved the most powerful celestial beings, the sources of light and time, in a drama of failed marriage and family breakdown. The sun and moon, which humans depended upon for their very survival, were revealed to be persons with complicated emotional lives, with failures and suffering, with ongoing tensions that could never be fully resolved. This made the cosmos feel intimate and meaningful rather than distant and impersonal, made the sky a stage where profound truths about relationship, duty, and justice were perpetually displayed. For Saul herself, the continuing dance meant ongoing reminders of what had happened. Every month, as the moon waxed toward fullness, she saw her former husband growing in strength and brightness. Every full moon, when they were positioned on opposite horizons, she faced him across maximum distance, perhaps experiencing renewed pain at the memory of his betrayal. Every new moon, when he approached her position in the sky, she felt him drawing near despite the separation, perhaps experiencing anxiety about potential violation of boundaries. Her daily journey across the sky, which should have been a joyous expression of her divine power, was shadowed by these ongoing reminders of her failed marriage. Yet Saul maintained her dignity and continued her essential cosmic functions with unwavering reliability. She rose every morning without fail, brought warmth and light to the world below, nurtured her daughter Ximena with consistent devotion, and fulfilled all her responsibilities despite her personal suffering. This steadfastness made her even more admirable in the eyes of her worshippers, who saw in her an example of maintaining duty and virtue even in the face of profound personal betrayal and ongoing difficulty. For Mėnuo, the continuing dance was one of perpetual consequence and limitation. He was condemned to undergo his monthly cycle, whether understood as repeated splitting or simply as the regular pattern of his movements relative to the sun. He could never fully escape the consequences of his transgression, never find complete redemption or forgiveness, never restore himself to his original status before the betrayal. His changeable nature, which had made him unsuited to permanent marriage, continued to define his existence, but now it was bound within structures of punishment and enforcement that limited his freedom and constantly reminded him of his failure. The moon god still served important cosmic functions. His light illuminated the night, his phases marked time, his influence affected tides and agricultural cycles. He was still a god, still powerful, still essential to the proper functioning of the universe. But his status was diminished, his reputation tainted, his movements constrained by the judgment Perkunas had delivered. He was a divorced father visiting his daughter on a regulated schedule, a disgraced deity performing his duties under constant supervision, a changeable god whose changeability had been proven catastrophically destructive but who was still required for cosmic order to function. The daughter Ximena, caught between her separated parents, received visits from both but could never experience them together in harmony. The earth was warmed by the sun during the day and illuminated by the moon at night, receiving the blessings of both but never in coordinated fashion, never as the unified gift of a harmonious divine couple. This separation of influences meant that earthly existence was characterized by alternation and opposition rather than synthesis and harmony, by the cycling between day and night rather than the integration of solar and lunar principles. Yet Ximena thrived despite her parents' divorce. The earth goddess continued to produce her harvests, to nurture her creatures, to provide the foundation for all terrestrial life. She maintained relationship with both father and mother, honored both, received blessings from both. Her situation was complicated and perhaps not ideal, but it was functional and sustainable. She represented the possibility that life could continue and even flourish despite broken relationships, that children could thrive even when parents were separated, that the consequences of transgression, while serious and lasting, need not be completely destructive. The continuing dance thus represented a kind of stable dysfunction, an arrangement that worked despite being born from catastrophe. Sun and moon maintained their separation, mostly avoided each other, coordinated their movements only to the minimal degree necessary to both visit their daughter. Perkunas maintained order through vigilance and threatened punishment rather than through natural harmony. Osrine and other celestial daughters performed their duties within this complicated family structure. And humans on Earth observed all of this, learned from it, and organized their lives according to the rhythms it established. This was not the ideal cosmos that might have been created through the successful marriage of sun and moon, not the harmonious universe that sacred union should have produced. But it was a functioning cosmos, an orderly system that, despite its origins in betrayal and its maintenance through enforcement, provided the conditions necessary for life to continue. The continuing dance was eternal, unchanging in its basic patterns while varying in its specific details with each cycle, a cosmic reminder of both the consequences of transgression and the possibility of continued function despite broken relationships. Summer solstice, Saulė's greatest festival. Among all the sacred times in the Baltic religious calendar, none was more important or more joyously celebrated than the summer solstice. the longest day of the year when the sun reached the peak of its annual journey and Saulė's power was at its absolute maximum. This festival, known as Rasos in Lithuania and Jāņi in Latvia, was the supreme celebration of the sun goddess, a time when her worshippers honored her with elaborate rituals, all-night festivities, and customs designed to capture and preserve her blessing during this moment of peak solar power. The summer solstice occurs around June 21st or 22nd in the northern hemisphere, when the sun reaches its northernmost point in the sky and the day is longer than any other day of the year. For people living at the relatively high latitudes of the Baltic region, the summer solstice was particularly dramatic. In the northern parts of Lithuania and Latvia, the sun barely sets at all during this time, with twilight lasting throughout the short night and true darkness never fully arriving. This created an almost magical atmosphere, a liminal time when the normal boundaries between day and night, between light and darkness, seemed to dissolve or become permeable. The celebration of Rasos or Jāņi typically began on the evening of June 23rd and continued through the night until dawn on June 24th. This timing meant that the celebration encompassed both the actual moment of the solstice and the threshold between the longest day and the first subtle shift back toward shorter days. It was a time of maximum light but also of impending change, of peak solar power but also of the beginning of the sun's gradual retreat southward that would continue until the winter solstice 6 months later. The name Rasos in Lithuanian comes from the word for dew, rasa, reflecting the belief that the dew that formed on this particular night was especially magical and powerful. This dew was understood to be a gift from Saul, droplets containing concentrated solar blessing that had fallen during the night and could be gathered at dawn. Young women would rise before sunrise on the morning of June 24th and go out into fields and meadows to wash their faces in this sacred dew, believing it would enhance their beauty, preserve their youth, and bring them health and good fortune. The dew was also collected and preserved for use in healing and magical purposes throughout the year. Water gathered from morning dew on the summer solstice was believed to have special properties, capable of curing diseases, removing curses, strengthening the body, and providing protection against evil. This belief reflected the understanding that during the solstice, when Saulė's power was at its peak, everything she touched or influenced was imbued with concentrated divine blessing. The dew, which appeared at that liminal moment between night and day, between the solstice celebration and the return to normal time, captured and preserved this blessing in tangible form. Fire played a central role in Rasos celebrations, as it did in many festivals honoring Saul. Large bonfires were built, often on hilltops or other elevated locations where they could be seen from great distances. These fires represented the sun's power, bringing celestial fire down to earth, creating earthly suns that blazed through the night. Communities would gather around these bonfires, singing songs, dancing, feasting, and maintaining the flames throughout the night until dawn. The fires served multiple purposes. They honored Saul, offering worship through the element most closely associated with her nature. They provided light during the brief hours of darkness or twilight, extending the day's illumination through human effort. They created a gathering place for community celebration, a focal point around which people could congregate and participate in collective ritual. And they were believed to have protective and purifying properties, driving away evil spirits and malevolent forces that might threaten the community. Young people would leap over the fires, testing their courage and agility while also participating in a purification ritual. The act of jumping through fire and smoke was understood to cleanse both body and spirit, to burn away negative influences and to demonstrate bravery. Couples would leap over fires together, holding hands, their ability to clear the flames without falling seen as an omen for the success of their relationship. These fire-jumping rituals combined practical elements of physical challenge with spiritual meanings of purification and blessing. Wreaths of flowers and herbs played important roles in the solstice celebration. Women and girls would spend the day gathering flowers and weaving them into wreaths or crowns that they wore during the evening festivities. These floral wreaths were not merely decorative but had specific meanings and purposes. Different flowers represented different virtues or carried different magical properties. The act of wearing a flower crown connected the wearer to the bounty of nature, to the fertility of summer, and to the goddess whose solar power made all plant life possible. At some point during the celebrations, these wreaths would be cast into water, typically into rivers or lakes. Young women would throw their wreaths from riverbanks or bridges, and the movement of the wreaths in the current was observed for divinatory purposes. If a wreath floated well and traveled far, this was a good omen for the woman who had thrown it. If a young man retrieved a woman's wreath from the water, this suggested a potential romantic connection between them. The wreaths floating on water combined solar and aquatic symbolism, reflecting Saulė's connection to both fire and water, her journey through the underworld sea, and her purification in sacred waters. The search for the mythical fern flower was one of the most romantic and mysterious aspects of Rasso's celebration. According to folk belief, ferns bloomed only once per year on the night of the summer solstice, and their flowers had magical properties. Anyone who found a fern flower would gain the ability to understand the language of animals and plants, to see hidden treasures, to unlock secrets, and to possess great wisdom and power. The catch was that fern flowers were extraordinarily difficult to find, bloomed for only a brief moment, and were guarded by evil spirits who sought to prevent humans from obtaining them. Young couples would venture into forests during the solstice night, ostensibly searching for fern flowers. In reality, this custom provided socially sanctioned opportunity for young people to spend time alone together in romantic settings, away from the supervision of elders. The magical atmosphere of the solstice night, the liminal quality of the time, and the traditional permission granted for this activity made it a special occasion for courtship and romance. Whether or not anyone ever actually found a fern flower was almost beside the point. The searching itself was the real purpose of the custom. Herbs gathered on the solstice night were believed to have maximum potency and power. This was the moment when Saulė's energy was most concentrated and when plants that had been growing throughout the spring and early summer had absorbed maximum solar blessing. Medicinal herbs collected at this time would be more effective in healing. Protective herbs gathered during the solstice could provide stronger defense against evil. Magical herbs used in various folk practices would have enhanced power if harvested when the sun's influence was at its peak. People would gather specific herbs known for their properties and uses: St. John's wort for healing and protection, chamomile for soothing and calming, mugwort for dreaming and divination, and many others. These herbs would be dried and stored carefully, then used throughout the coming year for medicine, magic, and ritual. The timing of the harvest was crucial. Herbs gathered at the summer solstice were qualitatively different from the same plants gathered at other times, infused with concentrated solar energy that enhanced their natural properties. Songs and dainas played crucial roles in the solstice celebration. Throughout the night, people would sing traditional songs honoring Saul, celebrating summer and fertility, expressing hopes for good harvests, and recounting mythological stories. These songs were not merely entertainment but were understood as active worship, as means of communicating with and honoring the goddess. The repetitive, rhythmic nature of many folk songs created an almost meditative state, and when sung collectively by groups gathered around fires, they generated powerful emotional and spiritual experiences. Many of the songs sung during Rasso specifically addressed Saul, praising her beauty, thanking her for her blessings, asking for her continued favor. Some songs recounted the story of her marriage to Mėnuo and the subsequent betrayal, keeping alive the central myth of Baltic celestial religion. Others described her daily journey across the sky, her castle beyond the sea, her relationships with her daughters and other divine beings. Through these songs, the mythology was transmitted from generation to generation, preserved in memorable melodic form that could be easily learned and passed on. Dancing was another essential element of the celebration. People would dance around the bonfires, moving in circles that mimicked the sun's circular journey across the sky. These dances were often linked, with participants holding hands or holding onto ropes or ribbons, creating large circular formations that symbolized cosmic harmony and community solidarity. The circular dance patterns connected participants to solar symbolism, to the eternal cycling of seasons, to the movement of celestial bodies across the heavens. Staying awake throughout the entire solstice night was considered important, though not everyone succeeded in this challenging task. The goal was to greet the sunrise on June 24th after having celebrated through the night, to welcome Saulė's appearance at dawn with fresh devotion and renewed energy. Those who managed to stay awake through the entire celebration were believed to receive special blessings from the goddess, recognition for their dedication and endurance. The moment of sunrise after the solstice night was particularly charged with meaning, as it represented the return of the sun after the peak of her power, the beginning of the gradual but inevitable decline toward winter. At dawn, people would climb hills or go to elevated locations to watch the sun rise. This sunrise observation was not casual but deeply ritualized, involving prayers, songs, and gestures of reverence. The sun goddess was greeted as she appeared on the eastern horizon, welcomed as one would welcome an honored guest or beloved family member. Her appearance was understood not as a mechanical inevitability but as a gift, a blessing, the voluntary return of a divine being who could have chosen to abandon the world to darkness but instead continued faithfully performing her cosmic duties. Special foods were prepared and consumed during the Rasos celebration. Cheese, particularly a round wheel-shaped cheese, was traditional, its circular form echoing the solar disk. This cheese was sometimes called Janu Sears in Latvian or St. John's cheese after the Christian saint whose feast day on June 24th had been merged with the older pagan celebration. Beer and other fermented beverages were consumed in abundance, offerings poured into fires or onto the ground as libation to Saul and other deities. The celebration of Rasos was not limited to a single night but extended into the following day, June 24th, with continued feasting, games and community activities. This was a time of joy and abundance, a celebration of summer's peak, a thanksgiving for the sun's blessings. Markets and fairs might be held, allowing people from different areas to gather, trade goods, arrange marriages and strengthen social bonds. The solstice celebration thus served important social as well as religious functions, bringing communities together and reinforcing collective identity. The summer solstice also marked an important transition point in the agricultural year. It came after the spring planting but before the main harvests of late summer and autumn. Crops were growing but not yet ready to be gathered. This made it an appropriate time for celebration and thanksgiving for what had been received so far, while also petitioning for continued blessing through the remainder of the growing season. The sun's power at its peak during the solstice would continue to be needed for crops to mature fully and produce abundant harvests. For those devoted to Saul, the summer solstice was the high point of the year, the moment when connection with the goddess was most accessible and most powerful. The sun's physical presence in the sky for the maximum number of hours meant that her spiritual presence and influence were similarly maximized. Prayers offered during the solstice, petitions made at this time, and worship conducted during these celebrations were believed to be particularly effective, reaching the goddess when she was most available and most able to respond with blessing. The contrast with the winter solstice 6 months away was stark and meaningful. Where the summer solstice celebrated maximum light and power, the winter solstice would mark minimum light and the sun's greatest weakness. Where Rasos was joyous and abundant, the winter celebration would be anxious and protective. These two solstices formed the poles of the solar year, the extreme points in Saul's annual journey, and together they structured the cycle of seasons and the rhythm of religious observance. The summer solstice celebration of Rasos thus represented the fullest flowering of Baltic solar religion, a time when the people's devotion to Saul found its most complete expression. It was simultaneously a harvest thanksgiving, a religious worship service, a community celebration, a magical working, and a cosmic participation in the sun's peak power. The rituals, songs, dances, fires, flowers, herbs, and all the other elements combined to create an experience that connected participants to their goddess, to their community, to the natural world, and to the cosmic order that governed all of existence. Through Rasos, the story of Saul was celebrated and renewed, her blessings received and preserved, and her worship maintained as the central focus of Baltic religious life. Winter solstice, the return of the sun. If the summer solstice represented the peak of Saul's power and was celebrated with joy and confidence, the winter solstice marked the opposite extreme, a time of anxiety and careful ritual designed to ensure the sun goddess's survival and eventual return to strength. During the darkest time of year, when days were shortest and the sun's path across the sky was at its lowest and weakest, the ancient Balts engaged in practices intended to support and strengthen Saul, to encourage her not to abandon the world to permanent darkness, and to assist in her gradual recovery of power that would begin after the solstice. The winter solstice occurs around December 21st or 22nd in the northern hemisphere, when the sun reaches its southernmost point and the day is shorter than any other day of the year. For people living in the Baltic region, this meant very long nights and very brief periods of daylight. The sun rose late and set early, spending only a few hours above the horizon. Its path across the sky was low, never reaching the heights it achieved during summer, and its light was weak and pale. This physical diminishment of the sun was understood in religious terms as Saul being weak, tired, or even dying. The period leading up to the winter solstice, from late autumn through early winter, was a time of growing concern. As days grew progressively shorter and nights longer, there was real anxiety that this process might continue indefinitely, that the sun might never stop declining, that eventually it would disappear entirely and never return. While astronomical knowledge suggested that the sun's return was reliable and certain, the mythological framework understood Saul as a living goddess who might fail, who might become too weak to continue, who might need human support and encouragement to maintain her cosmic journey. Lithuanian tradition held that from St. Catherine's Day, November 30th, people would begin waiting for Saul to return, though the actual turning point would not come until the solstice itself in late December. This early beginning of the waiting period reflected the anxiety about the shortening days and the hope for the sun's eventual recovery. People would watch carefully for signs that the sun was beginning her return, that days were starting to lengthen again, that the goddess was recovering her strength. Rituals during the winter solstice period focused on fire and light, attempting to support the weakened sun through sympathetic magic and symbolic reinforcement. Large fires would be built, not so much for celebration as during the summer solstice but more for support and encouragement. These fires represented earthly manifestations of solar power, human-created suns that continued to burn even when the celestial sun was at its weakest. By maintaining strong fires during the darkest time, people participated in sustaining solar power, contributing what they could to ensure that light and warmth did not entirely disappear from the world. Candles and torches were kept burning throughout the longest night, the solstice night itself when darkness lasted longest. These lights served both practical purposes, illuminating homes and spaces during the extended hours of darkness, and spiritual purposes, representing humanity's commitment to maintaining light and resisting the encroachment of darkness. Every candle lit, every torch burning, every hearth fire carefully tended, was an act of solidarity with Saul, a demonstration that humans valued her presence and would do their part to ensure her survival and return. Food offerings might be made to Saul during this time, though the nature of these offerings differed from the abundant Thanksgiving offerings of harvest season or the joyous celebrations of summer solstice. Winter solstice offerings had a quality of pleading or support, attempting to strengthen the goddess, to give her sustenance that would help her survive this difficult time. Special foods might be prepared and portions set aside for Saul, sometimes placed near windows or in locations where the sun's light could touch them, symbolically feeding the goddess and helping her maintain her strength. Prayers during the winter solstice took on urgent tones, asking Saul not to abandon the world, encouraging her to continue her journey, promising continued devotion if she would only return to full strength. These prayers reflected genuine concern and anxiety, for the consequences of the sun's failure to return would be catastrophic beyond imagination. Without the sun, crops would not grow, animals would die, humans would freeze and starve, and all life would cease. The winter solstice thus represented an existential crisis point, a time when the fundamental conditions for continued existence seemed threatened. The turning point came at the solstice itself, when days began to lengthen again, even if imperceptibly at first. This was cause for relief and celebration, though celebration of a different character than the exuberant joy of Rossos. Winter solstice celebration was quieter, more introspective, marked by gratitude for survival and hope for continued recovery. The lengthening of days after the solstice, even by just a minute or two each day, was proof that Saul had survived her weakest moment and was beginning the long, gradual journey back toward strength and summer. The period after the winter solstice, through January and into February, was understood as Saul's recovery time. She was growing stronger but was not yet fully restored. Days were lengthening but were still short. The sun's path across the sky was rising but remained low. This recovery period required patience and continued support, ongoing attention to maintaining fires and lights, continued prayers and offerings, sustained effort to assist the goddess in her return to full power. The theme of death and rebirth was implicit in the winter solstice observance. Saul at her weakest might be understood as nearly dead, hanging on to existence by the slenderest thread, requiring all her divine strength and all the support her worshippers could provide to survive. Her beginning to strengthen after the solstice was a form of rebirth, a resurrection from near death back toward vitality and power. This annual cycle of decline and recovery, of near death and rebirth, made Saul a goddess not only of constant light but also of renewal, demonstrating that even when reduced to weakest state, recovery and return were possible. The winter solstice also had implications for understanding Saul's relationship with Mėnuo. During winter, when nights were longest, the moon had maximum time and space in the sky. Mėnuo's domain was extended while Saul's was restricted. This might be understood as the moon god having increased access to Zemina, their daughter, during the time when the sun goddess was weakest and least able to maintain her own visiting schedule. The celestial divorce's custody arrangement might seem to favor Mėnuo during winter, with the balance shifting back toward Saul as days lengthened through spring toward summer. Yet even at her weakest, even during the shortest days, Saul maintained her essential nature. She was still the sun goddess, still the source of all light and warmth, still the fundamental power that made life possible. Her weakness was relative, a diminishment from her summer strength but not an absolute loss of power or authority. She still rose each day, still traveled across the sky, still set each evening and journeyed through the underworld to return the following morning. Her reliability and faithfulness were never in question, even when her physical presence was reduced to minimum. Folk wisdom about the winter solstice included careful observation of weather and natural signs. Particular attention was paid to the quality of light on the solstice day itself, to the appearance of the sun if it was visible, to any unusual atmospheric phenomena. These observations were interpreted as omens and portents, providing clues about what the coming months would bring. A bright, clear solstice day was generally favorable, suggesting that winter would pass successfully and spring would arrive on schedule. A dark, cloudy solstice was more ominous, perhaps indicating continued difficulties ahead. The winter solstice also marked important practical transitions in the agricultural and domestic calendar. It came in the middle of winter when outdoor agricultural work was largely suspended. Food stores laid up from autumn harvests had to last through the remaining months of winter until spring planting and summer harvests could provide fresh supplies. The successful navigation of this period from winter solstice through to spring depended both on practical preparation and on divine blessing, on having stored sufficient food and on Saul surviving her weakness and returning to strength. The contrast between summer and winter solstices reflected broader dualities in Baltic religious thought. Summer was abundant, winter was scarce. Summer was confident, winter was anxious. Summer was celebration, winter was survival. These oppositions were not understood as good versus evil but as complementary poles of a complete cycle, both necessary, both part of the natural and divine order. Saul presided over both extremes, manifesting different aspects of her nature at different times but always remaining fundamentally the same goddess. The Christian feast of Christmas, established on December 25th, fell very close to the winter solstice, and when Christianity came to the Baltic region, there was inevitable merging and confusion between the old solar observances and the new Christian festival. Many winter solstice customs were transferred to Christmas, with fires, lights, feasting, and gift-giving being reframed in Christian terms while maintaining their underlying solar symbolism. The Christian narrative of light coming into the world, of divine birth in the darkest time, resonated with older Baltic understandings of Saul's survival and renewal at the winter solstice. Despite Christianization, elements of the older winter solstice observance persisted in folk practice for centuries. The emphasis on light and fire during Christmas season, the burning of Yule logs, the decoration with evergreen plants that remain green even in winter's darkness, the special foods prepared and shared, all carried echoes of pre-Christian solar worship. People might attend Christian services and observe Christian feast days while also maintaining older customs that honored Saul's survival and encouraged her return to strength. The winter solstice, then, represented Saul at her most vulnerable but also demonstrated her essential resilience and reliability. Despite being reduced to minimum power, despite the genuine threat that she might fail or abandon the world, she always survived, always began to recover, always returned. This annual demonstration of survival and renewal made her worthy of trust and devotion, proved that even in darkest times, light would return, warmth would be restored, and life would continue. The winter solstice was ultimately a festival of hope, celebrating not what was present but what was promised, not current strength but assured recovery, not the comfortable present but the certain future when the sun would once again reach its peak and Rossos would be celebrated with joy under endless daylight. The sacred symbols and animals. The worship of Saul and the broader cosmology of Baltic mythology were expressed not only through festivals and stories but also through a complex system of sacred symbols and animals that embodied divine presence and carried religious significance. These symbols and creatures served as bridges between the human and divine realms, physical manifestations of spiritual realities, and focal points for devotion and ritual practice. Understanding these sacred elements helps to reveal the depth and richness of Baltic religious life and the many ways in which mythology was integrated into daily existence. Horses held supremely important status among sacred animals, particularly in their connection to Saul. The sun goddess's tireless steeds that pulled her chariot across the sky each day were divine beings themselves, never tiring, never needing rest, maintaining their steady pace from sunrise to sunset for all eternity. These celestial horses were typically described as white or golden, their color reflecting the nature of sunlight and the radiant quality of their divine mistress. On earth, white horses were considered especially sacred to Saul and were treated with particular respect and care. To own a white horse was to possess something that reflected divine nature, an animal that shared qualities with the goddess's own mounts. White horses might be used in religious ceremonies, decorated with special ornaments during festivals, or treated as semi-divine beings whose welfare was a matter of spiritual as well as practical concern. Harming a white horse could be seen as an offense against Saul herself, a violation of the sacred that might bring divine disfavor. But horses generally, not just white ones, were understood to be under Saul's special protection and favor. These animals were essential to Baltic agricultural and military life, providing transportation, pulling plows, carrying warriors into battle, and serving countless other practical functions. Their importance to human civilization made them appropriate symbols of divine power and worthy of sacred status. The connection between horses and the sun goddess meant that proper care and treatment of horses was not merely good animal husbandry but religious obligation, a way of honoring Saul through respect for creatures she favored. The grass snake, called Zaltis in Lithuanian, held equally important sacred status and was specifically protected as being under Saul's care. These non-venomous serpents, common throughout the Baltic region, were understood to be beloved by the sun goddess, creatures she watched over with special attention. Folk belief held that if a grass snake was killed, Saul herself would weep, her tears falling as dew upon the earth in mourning for her lost creature. This protection of grass snakes had ancient roots, possibly connecting to Indo-European serpent symbolism and to the association between snakes and various divine figures across related mythologies. The snake's ability to shed its skin, emerging renewed and refreshed, might have connected it to themes of rebirth and renewal that were also associated with the sun's daily cycle of setting and rising. The snake's connection to the earth, its dwelling in holes and under stones, might have linked it to Zemina, the earth goddess and Saul's daughter, creating additional layers of sacred significance. Practical beliefs surrounded grass snakes as well. It was considered good fortune to have a grass snake living in or near one's home or barn. These creatures were seen as household protectors, bringing blessing and prosperity to the families whose property they inhabited. People would leave offerings of milk or food for grass snakes, treating them almost as household spirits or protective guardians. To chase away or harm a grass snake that had taken up residence near human habitation was to reject divine blessing and invite misfortune. The prohibition against killing grass snakes created practical benefits as well as religious ones. These serpents controlled rodent populations, eating mice and other small creatures that threatened stored grain and crops. By protecting grass snakes through religious prohibition, Baltic folk religion inadvertently promoted biological pest control, demonstrating how sacred law and practical benefit could align. The grass snake thus served both spiritual and practical functions, embodying divine presence while also contributing to agricultural success. White cows were another animal sacred to Saul, their pure white color connecting them to the brightness of sunlight and the purity associated with the goddess. Milk from white cows might be considered especially pure and suitable for ritual purposes, used in offerings or consumed during festivals as a way of partaking in sacred nourishment. The cow's role as a provider of milk, butter, cheese, and other dairy products made it economically essential, and this practical importance combined with sacred symbolism to elevate white cows to special status. White goats held similar sacred significance. These smaller, hardier animals that could thrive in less hospitable terrain were also connected to Saul through their white coloring and their ability to provide milk and other products. Goats' association with high places and mountains might have reinforced their sacred status, as elevated locations were often understood as closer to the divine realm and more suitable for communication with celestial deities. Birds, particularly those with white coloration or those associated with sunlight and dawn, were connected to Saul's realm. White doves might be understood as her messengers or servants. Roosters, whose crowing announced the dawn and heralded the sun's approach, were sacred to the goddess and to Osrine the morning star. The rooster's role in literally calling forth the day, its consistent performance of this task regardless of weather or circumstances, made it a symbol of faithfulness and a creature deserving respect and protection. The oak tree, while primarily sacred to Perkunas the thunder god, also had connections to the broader cosmic order that included Saul. These massive, long-lived trees were understood as cosmic pillars, connecting earth to heaven, providing pathways along which divine power could flow between realms. Sacred oak groves served as temples where worship was conducted, where eternal flames burned in honor of Perkunas, and where the presence of divine beings was most strongly felt. While Perkunas held primary claim to the oak, the thunder god's close involvement in maintaining cosmic order, including his role in punishing Mėnuo and enforcing the separation of sun and moon, meant that oak trees were indirectly connected to the entire cosmic drama of which Saul was a central figure. Symbolic representations of the sun appeared throughout Baltic folk art and material culture. The solar disk itself, sometimes depicted with rays emanating outward, was a common motif in textiles, pottery, wood carving, and other decorative arts. These solar symbols marked objects as being under Saulė's protection or dedicated to her honor. Placing solar imagery on household items brought divine blessing into domestic spaces, transforming ordinary objects into sacred artifacts. The cross within a circle, found extensively in Baltic folk art, has been interpreted as a solar symbol, representing the sun's four-directional radiance or the four seasons of the solar year. Similar to this were various forms of the swastika, an ancient Indo-European symbol representing the sun's movement across the sky and the turning of the seasons. In Baltic tradition, these symbols were purely solar and religious, with no connection to the later tragic misappropriation of the swastika by 20th-century political movements. Rosettes, wheels, and other circular or radial designs served as solar symbols, their circular form echoing the sun's disk and their radiating patterns suggesting the sun's rays spreading outward from a central source. These patterns appeared on traditional textiles, particularly on ceremonial clothing and ritual objects, marking them as connected to solar worship and Saulė's divine presence. Colors carried symbolic significance in relation to solar worship. Gold and yellow obviously represented sunlight and divine radiance. Red was associated with the sun at sunrise and sunset, with the fiery aspect of solar power, and with warmth and vitality. White represented purity, brightness, and the clear quality of brilliant sunlight. These colors appeared in combinations on ritual objects, ceremonial garments, and festival decorations, creating visual expressions of solar theology. The act of spinning and weaving, traditionally women's work in Baltic society, had sacred dimensions connected to Saul. The sun goddess herself was sometimes depicted as spinning or weaving, and the threads and fabrics produced by human hands were understood to echo divine creative activity. The golden threads often incorporated into ceremonial textiles literally brought solar symbolism into woven form, creating cloths that captured and reflected light, that shimmered and glowed with qualities that mimicked the sun's own radiance. Natural phenomena were interpreted as manifestations of or messages from Saul. The rainbow, which appeared when sunlight interacted with water droplets in the air, was understood as a divine sign or pathway. In some traditions, the rainbow was associated with Viva, a goddess or lam connected to Perkunas, but its fundamental dependence on sunlight meant it was ultimately a manifestation of Saulė's power interacting with the natural world. The colors of dawn and dusk, when the sun was near the horizon and atmospheric effects created spectacular displays of red, orange, pink, and gold, were seen as Saul displaying her full glory and beauty. These transition times, when day was becoming night or night becoming day, when solar light was transformed by its passage through layers of atmosphere, revealed special aspects of the goddess's nature that were hidden during the stark brightness of midday. Seasonal changes in the sun's path across the sky, the variation in the sun's rising and setting points along the horizon throughout the year, were carefully observed and understood as Saulė's annual journey. Her northward movement from winter solstice to summer solstice was her return to strength and power. Her southward movement from summer solstice to winter solstice was her gradual weakening and decline. This annual cycle provided the framework for understanding time, planning agricultural activities, and structuring religious observance. The shadow, that absence of light created when an object blocks the sun's rays, was understood as having significance in relation to solar power. Noon, when the sun was highest and shadows shortest, was understood as a powerful time, a moment of maximum solar presence. The lengthening shadows of late afternoon marked the approach of evening and Saulė's impending departure. The complete absence of shadows during the night, except for those cast by the moon or by artificial lights, represented Saulė's absence and Mėnuo's dominion over darkened hours. Folk medicine incorporated understanding of solar power and its connection to health and vitality. Sunlight itself was understood to be healing, capable of driving away disease, strengthening the body, and promoting recovery from illness. Objects that had been blessed by exposure to sunlight, particularly at sacred times like the summer solstice, were believed to carry healing properties. Water that had reflected the sun, stones warmed by solar heat, herbs that had absorbed concentrated solar energy, all these natural substances were understood as being imbued with Saulė's healing power. The prohibition against certain activities on particular days or at particular times reflected understanding of when solar power was most available or most threatened. During the winter solstice period, when Saul was weakest, certain demanding activities might be avoided to prevent further draining of cosmic energy. During the summer solstice, when solar power was at maximum, This was understood as an ideal time for activities requiring divine blessing and support. The integration of solar symbolism and sacred animals into daily life meant that worship of Saul was not confined to specific festivals or formal rituals but pervaded all aspects of existence. Every time someone treated a horse with kindness, every time a grass snake was protected rather than killed, every time solar symbols were woven into textiles or carved into wood, these actions constituted worship, acknowledged divine presence, and maintained proper relationship between human and divine realms. The persistence of these symbols and sacred animal protections long after official Christianization testified to their deep integration into Baltic culture. Folk artists continued to use solar motifs in their work. Farmers continued to protect grass snakes and honor horses. Traditional textiles continued to feature patterns derived from ancient solar symbolism. These continuities meant that even when the explicit mythology was forgotten or suppressed, the underlying religious sensibility persisted, maintaining connections to pre-Christian worldviews through symbols and practices that carried ancient meanings forward into new contexts. The sacred symbols and animals thus served as a continuous physical presence of the divine in the material world, making Saul and the broader pantheon of Baltic gods accessible and immediate rather than distant and abstract. These were not merely representational symbols pointing to absent divine realities but were understood as actual manifestations, as places and creatures where divine presence dwelt and could be encountered. Through symbols and sacred animals, the cosmos described in mythology was made tangible and real, integrated into the everyday world in ways that made religion inseparable from ordinary life. Conclusion: the eternal story and modern legacy. The story of Saul and Mėnuo, of their marriage, betrayal, divine punishment, and eternal separation, stands as one of the great mythological narratives of European civilization. This cosmic drama, preserved through centuries of oral tradition, folk songs, and cultural practice, offered the Baltic peoples a comprehensive explanation for observed astronomical phenomena while simultaneously providing profound insights into the nature of relationships, the consequences of transgression, the certainty of justice, and the establishment of cosmic order. The myth functions on multiple levels simultaneously. As an astronomical explanation, it accounts for the phases of the moon, the separation of day and night, the rare occurrences of eclipses, and the regular movements of celestial bodies across the sky. Every night when people looked up and saw the moon in one of its various phases, they were witnessing the ongoing consequences of Mėnuo's ancient betrayal and Perkūnas's enduring punishment. Every day when they experienced the alternation of sunlight and darkness, they were observing the custody arrangement between divorced celestial parents. The myth made the heavens comprehensible, transforming astronomical observation into narrative understanding. As a moral teaching, the story emphasizes the sanctity of marriage vows, the seriousness of infidelity, and the particular horror of incest. Mėnuo's transgression was not a minor failing but a fundamental violation of divine law, a corruption of proper relationships that threatened the stability of the entire cosmos. His punishment was correspondingly severe and eternal, demonstrating that certain violations could never be fully forgiven or forgotten but would result in permanent consequences. The myth taught that actions had lasting effects, that transgression brought punishment, and that even gods were subject to divine law and cosmic justice. As a family drama, the story explores complex emotional territory, the pain of betrayal, the difficulty of maintaining relationships after trust has been broken, the challenges of co-parenting after divorce, the effects of parental conflict on children. Saul's suffering, Mėnuo's disgrace, Osrin's compromised position, and Zemina's need to maintain relationships with both parents despite their separation created a narrative that resonated with human experience across centuries. The gods experienced the same relationship challenges as mortals, making their stories relevant and emotionally accessible. As a theological statement, the myth affirmed the reality of divine justice, the necessity of enforcing cosmic law, and the role of Perkūnas as guardian and enforcer. The thunder god's intervention was not arbitrary but necessary, not cruel but just, not optional but required by the very nature of cosmic order. His continuing vigilance demonstrated that maintaining proper relationships and boundaries required active oversight, that order did not maintain itself but needed a guardian who would act when violations occurred. The enduring power of this myth lies partly in its ability to hold all these levels of meaning together simultaneously. It is neither purely astronomical nor purely moral, neither merely explanatory nor exclusively didactic, but weaves together practical observation, ethical teaching, emotional resonance, and theological truth into a unified narrative that makes sense of multiple aspects of existence at once. This integration of different kinds of meaning into a single story exemplifies the power of mythology to provide comprehensive frameworks for understanding the world. The myth also reflects specifically Baltic cultural values and social structures. The emphasis on oaths and promises, on the binding nature of vows spoken before witnesses, reflects a culture where verbal commitments carried tremendous weight. The importance of proper boundaries between family members, the horror expressed at incestuous relationships, indicates cultural values around kinship and appropriate sexual relationships. The role of male authority figures in enforcing order while female figures maintain domestic and nurturing functions suggests patterns of gender relations in traditional Baltic society. Yet the myth also grants significant power and agency to its female characters. Saul is not a passive victim but a powerful goddess in her own right, the source of all life, sovereign over the day, capable of both nurturing and justice. Osrine, whether understood as victim or accomplice, is a figure of remarkable beauty and faithful service. Ximena continues to flourish despite her parents' divorce, maintaining relationships with both and receiving blessings from each. The myth does not simply reinforce patriarchal authority but presents a complex divine family where power, responsibility, and moral agency are distributed across gender lines. The Christianization of the Baltic region, which occurred relatively late in European terms between the 14th and 15th centuries, did not immediately eliminate this mythology or erase its cultural influence. Folk traditions proved remarkably persistent, with songs, customs, and beliefs surviving for centuries after official conversion to Christianity. The myth of Saul and Mėnuo continued to be told in rural areas. The summer and winter solstice celebrations continued under slightly modified forms, and solar symbolism persisted in folk art and material culture. The Christian Church sometimes attempted to suppress these older beliefs and practices, viewing them as pagan superstition incompatible with Christian faith. But more often, there was a process of syncretism and adaptation, where Christian and pre-Christian elements merged and coexisted. Saul's characteristics were sometimes transferred to the Virgin Mary, solar festivals were reframed as Christian holy days, and mythological stories were retold with Christian interpretations. This created a complex religious landscape where Christianity was the official faith but where older Baltic spirituality continued to influence how that Christianity was understood and practiced. The modern era has seen renewed interest in Baltic mythology and pre-Christian religious traditions. The Romuva movement, a neo-pagan revival that seeks to reconstruct and practice Baltic paganism, has made Saul and other traditional deities the focus of contemporary worship and spiritual practice. Annual celebrations of Rasos and other traditional festivals draw participants who wish to connect with their cultural heritage and explore alternatives to Christianity. These modern practitioners understand themselves as continuing ancient traditions, maintaining links to pre-Christian ancestors, and honoring gods and goddesses who were worshipped for millennia before Christianity arrived. Academic study of Baltic mythology has also flourished, with scholars analyzing folk songs, investigating archaeological evidence, and applying comparative mythology methods to understand Baltic traditions in the broader context of Indo-European religion. This research has revealed the remarkable preservation of ancient elements in Baltic materials, the conservative nature of Baltic languages and cultures, and the valuable insights Baltic mythology offers into understanding other Indo-European mythological systems. The story of Saul and Mėnuo has been examined from linguistic, literary, astronomical, anthropological, and theological perspectives, yielding new understanding of its meanings and functions. The myth continues to inspire contemporary art, literature, and music. Lithuanian and Latvian writers have retold the story in modern forms, composers have created works based on its themes, visual artists have depicted its scenes and characters. These creative reinterpretations introduce the myth to new audiences, demonstrate its continuing relevance, and show how ancient narratives can be adapted to speak to contemporary concerns while maintaining their essential character and power. For Lithuanians and Latvians today, the myth of Saul and Mėnuo serves as a cultural touchstone, a distinctive element of national identity that connects modern people to their pre-Christian ancestors. In an age when globalization threatens to homogenize cultures and erase distinctive traditions, this ancient mythology provides a sense of rootedness, continuity, and unique identity. The story belongs specifically to the Baltic peoples, emerging from their particular history and geography, expressing their distinctive worldview and values. The astronomical accuracy underlying the myth also deserves recognition. Ancient peoples who created and preserved this story were careful observers of the sky, noting the phases of the moon, tracking the sun's annual journey, observing eclipses and planetary movements. Their mythological framework was not simply fantasy or superstition but was grounded in genuine observation and understanding of celestial mechanics. The myth encoded astronomical knowledge in memorable narrative form, allowing it to be preserved and transmitted across generations. The separation of sun and moon, the phases of the lunar cycle, the alternation of day and night, all continue to structure human experience just as they did millennia ago when this myth was first told. Every day, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, just as Saul has done since her marriage to Mėnuo ended and Perkunas established the new cosmic order. Every month, the moon waxes from new to full and wanes back again, displaying either the repeated punishment of Mėnuo or the permanent scars he bears from the thunder god's judgment. Every year, the sun moves from winter weakness to summer strength and back again, following the annual cycle that structures the seasons. These eternal patterns, which will continue as long as the earth orbits the sun and the moon orbits the earth, ensure that the myth of Saul and Mėnuo remains relevant and observable. It is not a story confined to ancient texts or preserved only in memories but is enacted daily in the sky above us. Anyone, anywhere, at any time can look up and see the continuing consequences of that ancient betrayal, can observe the cosmic order established through divine punishment, can witness the eternal dance of sun and moon that began with a failed marriage and resulted in permanent separation. The lesson that relationships require faithfulness, that vows must be honored, that transgression brings consequences, that justice will ultimately be enforced, these remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Human nature has not fundamentally changed since the ancient Balts first told this story. People still struggle with desire and duty, still face temptations to violate commitments, still experience the pain of betrayal and the challenges of maintaining proper boundaries. The myth speaks to these timeless human concerns through the elevated language of divine drama and cosmic consequences. The story also offers hope in its assertion that order can be restored even after catastrophic violation, that life can continue even after relationships have broken, that the cosmos will not collapse into chaos even when individual actors fail in their responsibilities. Perkunas's intervention established a new order that, while not ideal, was functional and sustainable. Saul continued her cosmic duties despite her personal suffering. Ximena flourished despite her parents' divorce. The message is one of resilience, of the possibility of moving forward after disaster, of creating workable arrangements even when optimal ones are no longer possible. For those who study mythology, the Baltic traditions offer particular value because of their conservative nature and relatively late preservation. While Greek, Roman, Norse, and other Indo-European mythologies are known primarily from ancient texts written millennia ago, Baltic mythology was still living tradition being actively practiced and transmitted orally into the 19th century. This means we have access to a relatively recent and well-documented example of Indo-European paganism, providing insights into how such religions actually functioned in daily life rather than merely how they were described in literary sources. The myth of Saul and Mėnuo, then, is not merely an interesting ancient story but a living tradition that continues to shape cultural identity, inspire artistic creation, structure religious practice, and offer wisdom about relationships, justice, and cosmic order. It connects modern people to their ancestors, explains observable phenomena, teaches moral lessons, and provides a framework for understanding the world that is simultaneously practical and spiritual, descriptive and prescriptive, ancient and relevant. As we conclude this exploration of the complete story of the sun and moon in Baltic mythology, we are left with appreciation for the depth and sophistication of these ancient traditions, for the skill and care with which the myth was preserved and transmitted across generations, and for the continuing power of these narratives to speak to contemporary concerns and questions. The story of Saul and Mėnuo reminds us that the night sky is not merely a collection of inert objects following mechanical laws but a realm where ancient dramas continue to unfold, where divine justice is perpetually enacted, where the consequences of long-ago actions remain visible and relevant. So tonight, when you look up and see the moon in whatever phase it currently displays, remember that you are observing more than a satellite reflecting sunlight. You are witnessing the ongoing punishment of a God who violated sacred vows, the eternal consequence of betrayal and the lasting nature of divine justice. You are seeing evidence that actions have consequences, that transgression brings punishment, that cosmic order is maintained through vigilant enforcement. And tomorrow morning, when the sun rises and brings another day of light and warmth, remember that you are receiving the blessing of a goddess who, despite betrayal and pain, continues faithfully performing her duties, maintaining her commitment to the world, and demonstrating that virtue and reliability are ultimately more powerful than changeability and transgression. The eternal dance continues, the cosmic drama proceeds, The story of Saul and Mėnuo is told anew with each sunrise and moonrise, with each turning of the seasons, with each passing of days and nights that structure our existence. May you see the heavens with new eyes, understanding that the sky above tells stories of divine love and betrayal, of justice and consequences, of permanent patterns established through cosmic drama that continues for all eternity. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Baltic mythology. If you enjoyed learning about Saul and Mėnuo, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of cultural mythology from around the world. Until next time, may the sun bless you with her warmth and light, and may the moon guide you safely through the darkness.